Please can I now ask that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided when we are broadcasting from Democratic Services.
We're live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this meeting of the Children and People Scrutiny Committee. The agenda, papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to film the photograph, please identify yourself so anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. One person must identify themselves not wishing to be recorded. Thank you. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible, use the microphone, keep background noise to a minimum, and please ensure that all mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. So welcome again. We have some members of the committee joining us remotely today. I ask them to confirm they can hear and check that we can hear them. So Councillor Tony Fagan, can you hear and see?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair. I can hear you. Thank you. If I can just ask for some confirmation at some time whether attending virtually is counted as attendance or not, that would be good to have clarification. Thank you.
I'm going to clarify that, yes. There is an amendment to the minutes, which I'll come back to. Councillor Andrews is not yet with us, but he's expecting to join about 3 p.m. and if he does so, it'll be remotely. And we've got the lead member, Councillor Toynbee, I think just might be poorly or here with us. Can you hear and see us okay?
Yes, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I can see you and hear you.
And you don't look too poorly, I'm pleased to say. Thanks for joining us. Any members of the committee or cooperative with voting rights who join meeting remotely are not able to vote on any resolutions of the committee, but otherwise participate in the debate. So we have 3 voting councillors here today and a 4th one just arriving. So we're well quorate now. Also joining us remotely today, I believe we have Ruth Whittingham, Head of Law and Legal Business, Partner Children and Families. Can you hear and see us okay, Ruth?
I can hear and see you, Chair.
Joining us. Present in the room, we have myself, Councillor Jones, Councillor Summers, Councillor Anson and Councillor Kenyon. I'm not going to ask us to introduce ourselves. You all know who they are. Carol Freeman, Corporate Director of Children and Young People. Thanks for joining us, Carol. Matthew Sampson, who I think was going to join us, but I think you're online now, Matthew. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm joining remotely today. Excuse me.
See us okay?
Yeah, I can see and hear you.
Right. You as the Interim Assistant Director, Children's Safeguarding, Quality and Improvement. In the room, we have Rob Bellier, Project Lead. Thanks for joining us, Bart. We have a new co-optee, and welcome to Victor Darren of the Archdiocese of Cardiff. First meeting, hope you'll join us anymore. Good. We have also the co-optee nomination, observing Fiona Reid, the proposed families co-optee. We'll come back to that a little later on. And we have a number of other attendees present, and I'm not going to ask them to introduce themselves, but there's a few of them. Michael Carr, who is the Statutory Scrutiny Officer, James Vickery, who's acting as our clerk in training, and I think you're also standing in for Jen, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I've not missed anyone off, I hope. So apologies for absence. We've had confirmation of absence and apologies from Mr. Sam Catley, who's the head of the co-optee, Mr. Andy James, who's the co-optee, and Councillor Hewitt, who is the Deputy Chair, and also from Jane Ellis of Health Watch. Are you aware of any of the apologies? Oh, thank you. And we have no named substitutes. Item 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. To receive any declarations of interest by members in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interest in any of today's agenda? No declarations, thank you. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting. To approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on 22nd of February. Taken at your point, Councillor Fagan. I knew Clark queried whether the vote attendees should be on the minutes or not. That has been clarified. You should be, and we will amend the minutes accordingly to add the virtual attendees. Are there any other proposed corrections to the minutes? So I'll take the minutes of the meeting 22nd March, 22nd, approve them. Can members who are voting raise their hands to confirm that? Can somebody voting for?
Yeah, I was virtual last time, but can I still vote
You
from
can,
now?
you can
Yeah,
still vote,
okay,
yes.
all right, thank you.
And you're voting for councillor Thomas too. That's all in favour. Thank you. But many matters arising. Now we're going to look at the action tracker. What we implemented right at the beginning of this session of scrutiny, that we weren't always capturing actions to follow up on, so we introduced an action tracker. We want to make sure we brought it early in the meeting so we can look at any actions that we asked to be completed and had to be completed early on after the minutes. So this is the first time we've used these immediate after minutes. Hope you will agree, given that it's pretty important that the things we said we wanted done are actually done. That's what we brought it forward. I didn't really have a chance to look at it, members. There are several items on there that are still important and to be completed. I think the key point I wanted to make was that although this is a great step forward in that we are actually tracking the actions, which is part of the mentoring we've been doing, as you know, as part of the improvement in children's scrutiny performance was something that they were pleased that was implemented. But it does need some enhancement, and we have regular meetings on our work programme and the follow-up actions. And we are proposing to change the structure to a more smart format. So there'll be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timescale objectives on there. So we're hoping to make sure it's more updated, more specific on actions that we requested, who was responsible for them and how they come back to us. Councillor.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find the recommendations from the minutes of the last meeting. Have I missed it?
Yeah, item 15, 22nd of March. There is one action that was picked up which says send out a report and update of the work programme and statement of next meeting. So that was it.
So that was not the Children's Commissioners newsletter or the social media platforms.
No, it's right at the end. It's item 15.
Yeah, but those were the recommendations, weren't they, on the minutes?
Oh, you mean that we usually haven't put stuff on the minutes on this action tracker? Right. We can check back on that, can't we? Yeah,
I
we'll
might
check.
have missed it, but I don't think I have.
We'll check back on that. Thank you. It is something we've agreed to do at the next work meeting anyway, to double check on the actions of it. Thanks for reminding us. There's nothing hugely significant in that. I don't think. Councillor Kenny, you might think differently.
No, I'm just trying to see if I can span this in and an action might be.
We can't hear you very well. Can you get a bit closer to mine, please?
Yeah, how's that?
That's better, thank you.
Okay. I was just trying to work out where to span this in, but it's just coming today, really. I've been made aware. So it might be action, it might be need an immediate action, and that's why I'm speaking to it. So please indulge me just for a second. Yeah, year 7 special needs students. They're looking now moving up to big school, as I used to call it, little school, big school. They're still unaware if they've got any places. I am aware that other mainstream schools and pupils know where they're going to. Is there a difference because these are special education needs children?
Can I ask that?
And is there a date when they'll find out the parents are quite anxious?
Okay, it's not something this meeting, but can I ask that? You pick it up, Darryl, and give a reply to Councillor Kenny on that?
I will, yes.
Great, thank you.
I'll come back to you.
Make sure you get a reply, okay. Anything else on the action tracker that anybody wants to particularly raise today? We will update it, and once we've done that, we can then have a more holistic review of the actions that hopefully we can follow this, and if not, why not? So the next point is co-optee confirmation. I've already said we're pleased to welcome the diocese nominee, and we have a recommendation from myself and the Vice Chair that we approve the co-option of Ms Fiona Reid as the family's co-optee. We interviewed several people for that post, have recommended that Ms Fiona Reid be appointed, and subject to your confirmation, she will be inducted and will be at our next meeting open as a full co-optee, but is observing today. Somebody please propose that we approve that recommendation.
I need some background on co-optees. I haven't received any. before I make any decisions.
Well,
Yes, I appreciate the chair and the vice chair know what they're talking about, but I don't. So until I see some background of the policy, I can't move any forward.
so you will abstain from the vote.
I'll abstain. Thank you.
Chairman, I'd echo those concerns as well. I did have my hand up to say exactly what Councillor Summers said. You can't ask to vote on something you don't know anything about. So I think it's ridiculous to even take a vote today.
The constitutional arrangement is that the chair and vice chair, in conjunction with legal, interview the applicants and they make recommendations.
You then can't ask a committee to vote on it if they haven't seen the information. So that's ridiculous.
Well, actually, the committee was circulated with information quite some time ago. There were 2 queries raised, which we answered. So the committee did have every opportunity to comment.
Is that on that particular person or generally?
On that particular person, yeah. So everybody was asked to comment. 2 queries raised, we answered those queries. Otherwise, I think it's a fair assumption that most of the committee members were happy with that nomination. So it should be a formal process. I will propose from the chair that we accept that nomination. Somebody second it, please. Votes adjourned. Thank you. All those in favour? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining?
Abstaining.
2 abstentions. So that's approved. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you join us at the next meeting this week. We have some questions from the public. They have been published and answers given. And we also have a supplementary question, which I assume I should read out. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Remember, 3 questions have already been answered, as I said, and they've been published as a supplementary item. There was a supplementary question, 2 question 1 from Amanda Whitfield, who was named in the first question, unable to attend. But the question is, the Department of Education reviewed the Fertile Heart programme after the Ofsted inspection and found serious non-compliant issues. Consequently, in the June 2021, the former Minister for School Standards, Nick Gibb, wrote to local MPs that a fertile heart contained content that would be hard for schools to present in a way that was consistent with the statutory guidance on relationship, sex and health education, RSHE. He undertook to write to the archdiocese and the publishers. According to the council response, it appears no significant changes to the programme have been made. Given this, how does the legal advice square with the council's duty to protect children and ensure primary equality and human rights are not breached? And how can the council legally challenge the continuation of such a programme in one of our schools? That's quite a complex legal question. Darryl, would you like to comment on how we can respond to that?
It is, Chair, and so with your permission, what I'd like to do is provide a written response after having consulted with the legal team, because it's asking about the legal advice, which I'm not qualified to.
That seems a perfectly reasonable thing. We need to make sure you get the legal advice correct. Thank you. And I understand there are some people who wish to ask a supplementary question. Are there any ladies who'd like to? All ladies, okay. Have you got a microphone close to you? So would you like to ask your question then, please?
So my question is about the online section.
Sorry, can you pull the microphone a little bit nearer? It's not, I can't hear you.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
written response. It refers to a lot of documents but fails to answer my question. And it does not explain how the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act apply to cases appearing in sexual assault. The Council's guidance for schools has only 1 reference to the Human Rights Act and 1 reference to the Equality Act. These are cursory references in the appendix and merely urge schools to ensure that they adhere to those acts. There is no explanation for schools as to how those acts apply. Cases of peer sexual assault. No wonder that schools are still getting it wrong and victims, mainly girls, are still at risk of harm. I am more than ever concerned that no officer in this council has got to grips with how the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act apply, and I hope I am wrong on that. Can someone, any officer or any member, put my mind at rest? And please explain to us how the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act should operate in the specific circumstance of protecting a rape victim who has reported the crime to the police but does not wish to go through the criminal justice system.
Thank you. What you're essentially saying is some clarity on the question that you originally asked about if they are applied when schools consider these cases.
What I'm asking for is clarity on the issue I raised in writing 8 months ago, which suggests that the council's current policy is discriminatory and breaches a girl's human rights.
Okay, I understand that. I don't know whether you wish to comment at all now, or go back with an explanation answer on that.
I think in the context of the question asked, I don't accept that the council has a corrupt policy, but I do want to make sure that we give a full and proper response to the question. So again, I'll defer to, because it's specifically about the guidance of the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act, I'll consult with our legal team colleagues against the school's guidance, and I'll provide a written response.
Thank you. And I know this has been asked several times, so we will obviously at scrutiny make sure that you get a reply promptly. Thank you. Councillor Kenny.
I was just about to say, can we put a time limit on that? A reply promptly means nothing. You say within the next 2 weeks, that certainly means something. So
That's a fair
through
question.
chairs, perhaps in the next 2 weeks, a written reply.
2 weeks?
Absolutely okay with that. Yeah.
2 weeks.
Thank
So
you.
we'll put a response to that within 2 weeks. Okay. Thank you. Does that finish your supplementary? Thanks very much. Was there another supplementary question somebody wished to ask?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Can you move the microphone a bit nearer, please? So we can hear you well. Thanks a lot.
In the written response to my question, which was question 3, again around peer abuse, the written analysis, it said the written analysis is more nuanced than this and makes it clear that each allegation, i.e. where no criminal case is pursued, is a separate case, and as such decisions are made on a case-by-case basis using the voice of the child as the main driving rationale. My problem with this is that the child in many cases will not be familiar with their rights under the Equality Act, their rights under the Human Rights Act, and may feel that they're under pressure to be kept in the same space as the person that they have accused of abuse. Now, more often than not, it is girls who are victims, sadly, boys who are the perpetrators. And my concern is that they're being asked to be in the same space and continue their education in the same space when one of these situations has arisen. What guidance will the officers of the council give to the schools, specifically where they aren't going to pursue a criminal case because they've learnt that this doesn't always happen in a timely manner, and what guidance will be given to schools?
Okay, thank you for the question. And the answer to the original question, it was made clear that obviously at the end of the day, if the schools are roughly decided on a case-by-case basis, interpreting the guidance. But what you're asking for is some further clarification about how and what sort of guidance we give to schools before they make that decision. Is there anything you'd like to add at all to that, Darryl, now, or is that something we need to also come back and clarify further?
So again, thank you for the question. And what I'll do, if I may, I'll refer to my colleague, the Service Director for Education, Skills and Learning, and provide a written response at the same time as the first supplemental question.
Within the same time scale.
Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. So you heard that the ECS undertook to reply within 2 weeks to seek any guidance we can have on any further clarification on the guidance that has been offered to schools. Is that okay?
Thank you. I look forward to reading your response.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Summers.
Just like to ask a question, Darryl, I'm not sure if you know it. What's in place when an accusation is made between students? What's in place to verify that that happened? It doesn't seem that if it's one person's word against another person's word, it is a bit of an issue. So I would imagine there has to be some kind of format that happens in that before you start turfing people out of, young people out of school. Thank you.
So absolutely, you're right. There's a difficult balance and process to be followed. But in the case of any allegation of abuse in the broadest sense of the term abuse, then working together is the statutory guidance that we follow in terms of having a strategy discussion, bringing the key parties together, considering the evidence that's available, and then undertaking a risk assessment of the Section 47 inquiry. And that then kind of determines the next stage. So in some instances, there is clear evidence, and in other instances, there is not. And then it comes down to ultimately the decision of the school to decide how they manage the risk and the circumstances. And obviously, other parties are involved with the Section 47 child protection inquiry system.
So basically what we're saying, this is a little bit more complicated than it first looks.
Thanks, because you've got your microphone on. I can't. Any investigation into allegations of abuse is often more complicated than it looks.
Thank you, Darren.
So you remember probably had a hand up. And allowed to make your comment if you wish. Would you like to add something to that? Any question?
Thank you. I'm interested to note that in Mr. Freeman's response, he does not refer to the Article 3 rights of the victim. Article 3 is about preventing inhuman and degrading treatment, but it also places a legal duty on the school to investigate breaches of Article 3. And that is where schools are failing to act. It's called a procedural obligation to act, to protect, and that's where the missing language is. And I note that Mr. Freeman didn't mention Article 3 rights in his response, and they need to be taken into account. So I don't disagree with anything he says, but there's a missing link in the thinking, which is the legal framework to protect victims in precisely this situation. Failing to take into Article 3 rights of a victim is where you fall into Equality Act issues, because this is a gendered crime. Almost all victims are female and almost all perpetrators are male. So if you say, we don't know what happened, therefore we're not going to act, that's when it slips into discrimination, because you have a gendered response to the problem.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure the DCS has noted that as an additional point to the question you raised earlier, to include a comment back on that particular point you raised. Thank you. I think that completes all the questions from the public and the supplementaries as well. Thank you very much for those questions, and we'll get the answers to you within 2 weeks. We'll move on to questions from members of the council. There are no questions from members of the council, so we move on to item 8, which is one of our main items of our meeting today, which is to scrutinise the increased budget for children's services, investing in children's services transformation as the heading. So the agenda text of this is to review the increased budget of children's services, investing in children's services transformation. As most people will know, we've had a significant increase proposed for children's services budget of 11.49 million. We had a workshop as committee members on this last week, where we presented by officers a broad outline of the budget. It's a 3-year transformational programme, and we looked at some of the expenses, the major part of which is 2 key people posts to be recruited, a quality assurance team, 12 new social workers, 15 business support workers, offering career progression to social workers so they stay with us, and it's a 12 months budget. And a key aim is to reduce the need to employ locums eventually, increase our permanent staff, and these are all aims of the transformational budget. I'm going to ask Darryl Freeman to present in this item in a moment. We'd like just to put to members when we are listening to the presentation and as a result of the workshop that we had last week. We should be asking ourselves, what is it we want to understand where the money is to be spent? Do we know the performance improvements that are expected and anticipated by the budget lines? What more information do we believe we need? When do we want to receive information and or confirmation from either the executive or officers that the actions that we feel that additionally needed will be taken and by when? So when you're commenting, could you please make sure it's a question and not just an opinion or a comment? some of the feedback we've had from the mentoring that's been conducted as a chair, that sometimes we aren't direct in the questions that we ask, which allows officers to answer in a way that doesn't necessarily get to the heart of the matter. So when you're thinking about what you're going to ask, please make sure it is actually has a question at the end of it. And also, can I ask that we don't have a long list of questions from each member? If you've got a list, then pick your top 2 or 3. We can also always follow up with the other questions later, but we're trying to get at the key questions in this meeting and not to bombard officers with lots of questions that actually probably isn't fair at the time. So if you could bear those in mind, please, when we come to ask the questions at the end. So can I now hand over to you, Darryl, to present on the item? And I know you're going to be supported by Bart and Matthew Sampson.
Thank you, Chair. So apologies to those members who were part of the workshop last week. Some of these slides are repeated, but for the public record and for members that weren't at the workshop. And just to clarify a point you made in your opening remarks, the investment is agreed rather than a proposal. It was agreed by Cabinet.
Thank you for correcting me.
So in terms of a background, Cabinet agreed the proposal for further additional investment in children's services of approximately £11.5 million to support ongoing children's activity. You're quite right that this is essentially a 3-year core transformation programme, but improvement doesn't end at the end of 3 years. Continuous improvement will continue, hopefully forever in that sense. We should always strive to improve. This is about the core heavy lifting, if you like, required to get children's services into a better place and to have stability and resilience going forward. It is quite likely that the service will be inadequate when Ofsted come later this year. We've had that conversation in the past. That's not to say that the actions that we're taking currently aren't the right actions. I'm absolutely confident that they are, and we're in consultation with the Ofsted and the DfE. But of course, the impact on children and young people is unlikely to be seen for another 6 to 12 months consistently and throughout the system. And when Ofsted come, they look for the impact and outcomes for children. So it's not a kind of an over pessimism on my part. There's an element of reality. And of course, if Ofsted don't come until much later this year, or even better early next year, then who knows, we might be in a better position. I've long since given up trying to guess when Ofsted might give us a call. So the £11.5 million includes maintaining all of the extra additional capacity that we've added over the last year. So that was 5 extra social work teams over the year, and service managers and a number of other additional support. And that's become necessary because we've seen a significant rise in demand, particularly during the autumn last year, October, November, and December. And at the minute, although that appears to be plateauing, we need to keep that additional capacity in place. But the investment also includes an opportunity to recruit a clinical psychologist for the fostering service. So our foster carers do an amazing job supporting some of our most traumatised children and young people. And this addition to the fostering team will help placement stability and to support those foster carers. We, in order to provide the best possible offer for our social workers and other workforce, we want to have a dedicated principal social worker. That role is currently attached to another role, and that's to make sure we've got best practice and standards at the fore of what we do. Quality assurance team I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. Newly qualified social workers, the offer for those has been a priority action, as you'll know, for some time now. And I'll say a little bit more on a future slide, likewise for the additional business support posts. A children's service, an effective running children's service, can't run without those back office individuals, and they do a cracking job. And we need more of them in terms of reduce the burden of recording them for social workers and to ensure that meetings happen on time and that the family experience is better. We're very much focused on building a workforce of the future. So within the investment as well, there's the provision to support a career progression scheme. In order that we improve our performance and management information reporting, we've got some additional resource for 12 months into the performance and information team, so that we can build that Power BI, that online dashboard, and that real data that we use to drive improvements. And the figure reflects the reality that employing locums is expensive. Locums generally cost more than permanent staff. And over the years, you quite rightly point out, Our intent is to reduce our reliance on locums and increase the proportion of our workforce that is permanent. Within the context, again, we've discussed this at scrutiny before, of an incredibly challenging employment environment. Nationally, there is a shortage of experienced social workers. We're not in the best place in terms of being able to compete with some of the local authorities to recruit experienced social workers. So as Councillor Kenyon and others have quite rightly championed on many occasions, we're very much looking to grow our own through apprenticeships, newly qualified social workers, and a range of other options. And that will have its impact over time. The request then summarised from the Cabinet paper itself is for 11.49 million to be released in 2 tranches. First tranche really released once the decision was made. We will go back to Cabinet in July with an update report on progress to date and future plans. The money this year has been drawn down from financial resilience reserves, and obviously that was explained to members and to Cabinet through a range of briefings that took place before the Cabinet meeting on the 31st. And we asked Cabinet to note that there is likely to be a pressure next year in the budget too, and but not in a similar scale or nature to that in this year. That's recognising that some of the additional capacity in place this year will need to continue through to next, but not all. And we'll review the capacity in October this year based on demand and data that we have at that time. But that nonetheless, we don't anticipate making any kind of request from reserves in the future. But any future requests will be made from a base budget for the midterm financial. So you'll have that, we'll be able to go through the scrutiny process and the normal budget setting process. You'll note the additional full-time equivalent posts added this year. Significant increase, not all of which we expect to see remaining posts with us next year, but absolutely reflecting the changes in demand that we've experienced over the last 6 months. I'll just briefly summarise some of the key points. So this was an Ofsted priority action that we strengthen and make sure there's sufficient capacity for management and supervision. So we added service managers back into the structure last year. These had previously been taken out some years ago as a cost-saving efficiency at the time, and they're already, so they're key. Those roles are key to the effective supervision of frontline managers and for tracking and driving our improvement. And since the reintroduction of those posts, we're seeing a much better grip on performance management and supervision for frontline managers. And we'll shortly be going out to advert for permanent posts in next month. Managing practitioners, there's only a small number of teams that see a managing practitioner. They sit between the team manager and practitioners. And in teams such as the MASH and the assessment teams, where you see high volumes of transactions, so decisions that have to be made and recorded, assessments that need to be signed off, Section 47 inquiries and the like. So you see that typically in the MASH and the assessment teams. A team manager in with a team of 6 or 7 just can't cope with that volume. And that was one of the challenges we saw last year in terms of things getting clogged up and delaying the system. So we've added managing practitioners, so they have a role to support the team manager and have the authority to sign off most of those work processes. And then again, that's seen much better throughput of work and much more evidence now of management oversight on case records. Newly qualified social workers and the support for our NQSWs is priority action 2. So in the past, a newly qualified social worker was part of the team establishment. So if it was a team of 6 social workers, then the newly qualified social worker was one of the 6. So as the team becomes pressurised and has a higher caseloads, then ultimately you gave the cases to the newly qualified social worker as well. So during their first year after qualifying university, they should go through their assessed and supported year in employment, have a reduced caseload, higher levels of supervision, and kind of get to learn the trade actually in practice and working with families rather than at university. We weren't good at doing that, and we didn't give newly qualified social workers the best start to their career. So the proposal supported by this decision is that we recruit 12, possibly more, newly qualified social workers during the year. They sit outside of a team, so they're extra posts essentially. They get the best possible start to their career. They spend placements in teams, but we manage their caseloads and we make sure they get the appropriate supervision and training. And hopefully at the same time then, they'll want to stay with us and build their career going forward. And that's a similar offer to many other local authorities, but that we didn't have in place before, very much focused on the future. Quality assurance, you and I together, we want to have a high degree of assurance that the work that we're doing in the service is of a high quality, it's making a difference for children, young people and their families, and it's not just about ticking boxes and assuring that we're hitting targets. So we haven't had that level of assurance in the past. And whilst quality assurance should be everybody's business, everything that I sign off as the director, I should be proud of the quality of the document I'm signing off. Likewise, we would want that social workers and team managers have the same level of pride in everything that they do. For the moment, because there's so much improvement activity on, we don't want to overload our team managers, asking them to do multiple case audits each month. So we are creating a small but dedicated team that will be the core to driving our quality assurance activity throughout the year, undertaking case audits, dip samples, thematic audits, working with other agencies, so we did multi-agency reviews and the like, and also celebrating good practice and sharing good practice across the service. And then as the year goes on, we'll be making sure that our other managers are skilled up to do a similar type of audit going forward. Thinking about the quality of our practice and learning from the best of the research and other local authorities out there, we've also made sure that all of our workforce has access to care knowledge, an online repository of best practice and research and other publications. We have Signs of Safety, which is a strength-based model. Is our practice model. Needs more work to be further developed and embedded, and again, that's part of the transformation fund. And we continue to welcome external feedback from organisations such as the Local Government Association. We'll be doing a peer review into our ICND services later this term, and also through the sector-led improvement partnerships funded by the Department for Education. So we want to be as open and transparent as we can about the quality of our practice and make sure that we're providing yourselves and me the assurance that that quality is of a high standard. We talked briefly in the intro that the proposal also includes a wide range of other roles, not just social workers, and that includes 15 additional business support posts. And I should say that there's a challenge for us as a council. So our entry grade business support posts across the council, so this is not just children's services, I'd say this is adults and communities as well. We struggle to recruit, we have a number of vacant posts, and that's something that as a council, we will need to work together across the directorates to identify a solution. So the basic grade business support post is only really just above living wage, and there are many employers out there that provide a different kind of offer and better salaries. So that's something that we're talking about in the corporate leadership team. But again, I think something that the scrutiny committee might be able to have some influence on as well in terms of its recommendation. We talked a little about the psychologists for the fostering team and also the extra resources into the performance team. Career progression. So we mentioned very briefly the challenges in recruiting experienced social workers. So we need to do better to hang on to the ones we've got, grow our own, and then develop our offer so that it's a much more attractive offer. So we are introducing a career progression scheme which will go live at the end of next month, May. So the intention being there, somebody could join us as a newly qualified social worker, have the best possible start to their career through the assessment supporting career and employment, progress to social worker grade, and then as they gain skills, experience and competence linked to the National Competency Framework, become an experienced social worker and ultimately an advanced practitioner through career progression. So you demonstrate competence, go through a panel process and then progress. We don't have that in place at the moment. There are a limited number of advanced practitioner posts and therefore it requires someone to leave. We want to make sure that people stay with us, develop their careers. So this proposal will mean that there are unlimited posts for potential advanced practitioners. So if people demonstrate that they have that skill and that competence, they can become an advanced practitioner. Ultimately, if they want to go into management, that is by application later on. But this is a real strength and something that our social work workforce have been asking for now for quite some time. And final points on recruitment and retention, just to kind of highlight some of the steps that we've been taking, because this is a point that, for example, Councillor Summers and others have asked consistently about. So we've done a great deal to try to increase the offer for social workers. We're continuing to review grades and job descriptions to ensure that we remain competitive. We are absolutely driving down caseloads, particularly evident now in the assessment teams where we had the most concerns earlier this year and end of last year. Increased management support and supervision. All of the research into retention and recruitment tell us that actually people stay because of the managers have got and the support they get from their manager. Increased focus on wellbeing and support, learning and development, and a more targeted recruitment campaign which has started already. And again, just to finish with where we started, really, we have some really good locums, and I just want to say that early on the record. We have some excellent locums and interim colleagues, and we'd like some of them to stay with us if they'd like to stay with us. But over time, we want to reduce our reliance on locums and increase the proportion of our workforce that is permanent. And I'll summarise the demand and flow. So we did this in quite a bit of detail at the workshop last week. I'm not going to do it in the same level of detail you're going to know. So the rate at which we've been able to improve over the last 6 months particularly has been hampered significantly by changes in demand and flow through the front door of the MASH and into the assessment teams, and at times that's threatened to overwhelm the service. Now that's characterised by this chart. So year on year is the rate at which the 31st of March 2022 just passed, compared to the previous year. So we've seen 134% rise in the number of contacts coming into the MASH, 273% rise in the number of assessments undertaken by the assessment team. And I won't go through each of those, but you're seeing a rise. Some of those raise questions in themselves because we need to sit down with our partners, so health, education, schools, education, the police and others, to say what on earth's going on there, because some of the data would suggest there may be other things happening rather than just improvement. But without the additional capacity that we've been able to have this year, the service will almost certainly have imploded or become overwhelmed. What we're on a more positive note, absolutely starting to see some evidence now that increased demand that we saw in the run up to the end of the calendar year last year, it started to plateau and in a number of areas started to dip a little now. And I would hope that by the end of Q1, so the end of June, we'd have a much more realistic picture of where demand is going. And again, very typically for a local authority that's in intervention and improvement, almost all local authorities that have been in that position report that they see a rise in demand during the 12 months after they start their improvement journey. Because again, that's about the message to referrers, changes in practice, quality of practice and the like. And that's the end of the presentation. I won't take you through the bullets of all the appendices and the points that went to Cabinet, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Darryl. And I would like to thank you and Louise and Bart and Michael for putting together a workshop last week at really short notice in order that we had a better insight into what the budget was all about, so we could ask questions today. So thank you for the work on behalf of the committee that you put into doing that. Right, gentlemen and ladies, we'd like to ask some questions. Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a pension scheme for our employees, for caregivers, care workers?
We have the local, so obviously people can choose to opt out or opt into their own pension scheme, but we've got the local government pension scheme.
Is there something we can do with that to make it look better? We need to get staff, and you know it's hard to get them because we don't pay enough. Maybe there's another route that we can go. Anyway, it's just a thought.
We're certainly, I don't know that there's much we can do with the pension scheme because that's very much regulated across scheme, but the local government pension schemes are a pretty generous pension scheme. We're certainly looking very closely at the terms and conditions around employment to make sure that we're competitive, but also it's an attractive offer that, you know, we know that Herefordshire is a lovely place to live and work. We've got to convince everybody else of that.
Pensions just seem to attract people, really, because they're thinking of the future and they want to make sure their future is bright. So pensions really make a difference if we can do something. Now, I did ask for the employment contract. I still haven't received it. I'd like to take a look at that and see. It's another aspect that we need to make sure is, I'm not sure if you're looking at changing any parts of it, but I'd like to see it again just to because there's a few things I wanted to see in it, as I mentioned. So if you can make sure I get that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so apologies if you haven't. I
No.
spoke to HR colleagues immediately after the last time you and I spoke about this, and I was assured they'd
I'd
send
really
it
like
to
to
you.
read that, because as far as I can, it does make a difference when people are being employed. They want to know how comfortable they're going to be. And the last question, you said in June that you're going to the cabinet for the extra?
July.
So do you think you'll have something for us to let us know how you're doing before, because you must have something to go to cabinet with. Perhaps we could meet before or right after to see what you have done.
Yes, so the forward work plan is on the agenda for later this meeting anyway, to think about how we schedule some of that.
Okay.
And also the improvement plans on the agenda. So we would expect to set a number of measures that matter with quarterly updates and targets. So again, we'll probably pick that up in the next agenda.
Okay, can we make sure we pick that up? Sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
In fact, I believe we asked that some time ago, and of course, the whole committee would like to see that in the contract as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it might be worth highlighting, Darryl, that when we had the workshop, there is a region agreement of the Association of Directors of Children's Services that we all won't compete with each other and staff, otherwise the staff will just move around. But how we negotiate an exemption from that, so we can offer, if we prefer, if we agree to different terms to the agreement within the local region. We'll just highlight that, I think.
So the regional memorandum of understanding concerns the employment of locums or agency staff, and yes, it provides a cap and certain kind of agreements across the region. We have an exemption from that at the moment, supported by the other directors of Children's Service, recognising some of the challenges that we've got. Similarly, you know, I'm very clear that I think we should return to the memorandum when we're able to do so. I think it's an important statement, and I have certainly given assurances to those other directors that we're really clear with agencies. I don't want to be seeing CVs of locums who are currently working in other local authorities in the West Midlands. It's not in our interest to be poaching any more than we would want to be poached. So it's about working together and making sure that we're recognising the difficulties we've got, but still being part of the region.
It's an important thing to understand, to know that they're not all taking workers off each other and they're just swapping around.
Absolutely.
So we'll hopefully have stability throughout the region. Any further questions from members? I know Councillor Kenny, you already had the yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few questions, a few observations. Some of these that you won't be able to necessarily answer, just perhaps some things for you to think about that you may well not have thought about. I didn't go to the workshop, I do apologise, but we are now outside of that. We have a good chinwag as and when required. So I do have a decent understanding of this. When I look at these figures, I think, Jesus, 11 million is a lot of money. Okay, a lot of money. People pull faces when historically they sold farms for 40 million and put it into the council. Now we're spending that. So we need to make sure we're spending it the best way we can. So this is what our job is, to make sure that you're doing it the best way we can. When I look at the figures and look at some of where it goes, the legal, let's start with them. Huge part of this is the legal. And I know I have many friends of solicitors. If you want anything done, speak to the legal secretary, because they do all the work and the solicitor signs it off. Potentially legal needs to be looking at good legal secretaries. If you've got half a dozen of them in there, it's far better than getting half a dozen solicitors in there. That's in my humble opinion, and sorry to the great lot of solicitors out there, but that's how the world goes. It'd be a fraction of the figure. So we've got to look at all those figures when they come in. It's the legal side of things. HR, it's expensive. We farm it out. It is expensive. They get a cut of this, that, and the rest of it. It's just a shame we can't do a little bit more inside. Like if you're a social worker and you recruit a mate or another fellow social worker, why not give them a bonus? Because there's no better way of getting someone to come and work and say, when you come to Herefordshire, it's cracking. And by the way, I'll get a few quid. It's little incentives like that potentially could get people to come along. So it's people encouraging them to come and work. We spoke about before the ongoing training. Now, if we're doing all this, I want to see some commitment from the social workers that are in Hereford, where they're supporting them and where we back things away for them. However, I want to see them stepping up and training other social workers, level 1s, level 2s, Yeah, that's correct from what I'm saying. Is it level 1, level 2?
Yeah, so you see newly qualified social workers, experienced social workers and advanced practitioners.
Yeah.
Certainly the advanced practitioners will typically also be practice educators and take on the role of training the newly qualified.
Absolutely, so as they come through. So, you know, we need to see some commitment from your social workers. So the next time you have your team's meeting, to get around and we're backing you, you need to back us as a one team. So I want to make that very strong, clear. After 2 years, what happens to the post disbanded? You know, what's going to happen to these social workers, additional ones out there at the moment? Are they going to be looking over their shoulder after 12 months thinking, I've only got 12 months of this left in this team. Do I need to go anywhere else? Or will there be positions within Herefordshire? Can you answer that for me before I go on?
Yeah, so interim work is by its nature interim. So most of the locums will be pleased that there's a commitment for 12 months, but won't necessarily be looking over their shoulder. There are a number of locums that we're already having conversations with about, we'd really like you to apply for a permanent role with us. So, and we will review, as I said, in October this year, in terms of what's happening with demand and flow, whether we need that level of capacity in the year ahead, and we'll have conversations with people very early on about that. But we're working hard to encourage some of our better locums to stay with us.
Excellent, that's really good to hear.
In fact, Councillor Kenyon, we're aware that you've often said that we should be developing our own social workers.
Oh, no, I'm not going to say that today.
No, I know you know. We said it for you at the workshop. We asked that particular question, and also Councillor Hugh and I went to an LGA meeting, members like to know, a week last Thursday, and we saw some examples from other councils about how they're working to retain their officers, and we are actually talking, and Darryl confirmed that we're talking to one of the best performing of those councils about how they retain their staff, and we're actually putting some of those activities into place here as well. In particular, after 2 years, those people we recruit should be given career progression, and that is an important part of the budget, offering career progression for people who we employ and will hopefully stay with us. So your views have been taken into account, have been asked, and looks like they're going to be delivered. We need to monitor that, but the intention is there.
Chairman, you've brought me so well into my next sort of observation question. Performance indicators. This is what we want as a scrutiny committee. We want to know who's setting them and what are they, and what's it going to be after 6 months, 12 months. Where are we going with this? I'm not going to say that word because I hate it, into the J and ends V, or Y even. But we need to know what they are. So performance indicators. Can you just say a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit more about them in the next agenda item, which is on the improvement plan. But
happy to wait. No,
yeah.
If it's coming along down the line, that's great. I'll shut up. Another thing I've mentioned before, I mentioned it again. We need to look at what work can be done by support workers as opposed to full-blown social workers. There's plenty of stuff out there that can be done. There's an event not in there straight away, so you must agree. Let's employ some of them. We've got a budget to fill around with. You know, if you want 12 social workers, you end up only getting 10. We'll get half a dozen support workers and get them in there, because they're the type of people, if you start with support workers, they may well have an interest to go on to become social workers. So if you train them right from that start, the get-go, you train loyalty, you know, so that's one observation. And one thing that no one likes talking about, but it's very much amongst us, is sexual abuse of children and the like. I don't think this touches this very much at all. Yes, there's a structure there, but if there's a child being sexually abused, how do you find that child before the social workers go in, you know? And I feel whether it's the remit, certainly the remit of this committee, and for the social workers to deal with it once they've observed it. But I feel that there's a lot of money going into children's services. Perhaps some of this money should have been, or could be, or future monies could be looked into educating children about lessons in schools, media campaigns, to say, you know, this is my space, personal space, do not touch it. Because a lot of people don't come forward. You see footballers come forward when they're 40s or 50s, they were abused when they were children. People don't say when they're young they were being abused. So we need to talk about this, because this goes on in Herefordshire just like everywhere else. So we need to do more in and around sexual abuse for children in Herefordshire. It's the most important thing I feel that we can do as a committee, is get amongst it and try and sort that out, and so children feel able to come and talk to people. That's through pastoral care in schools. the pastoral care in school is gone, perhaps if a social worker pops in or tells people about it or do a lesson on it, that's where we need to be doing, is proactive to find these and help these children.
Have you got a question you'd like to ask about that?
Yeah, are we going to do it?
Okay. Simple summing up.
Yes.
So on one level, I'd say, so the issue of protecting children, safeguarding is absolutely at the core of children's services, because in fact, statutory children's services isn't about early help and prevention. So obviously where abuse is suspected or known, that's where children's services absolutely come into their statutory role and are governed by a whole load of process and regulation at that point. I don't disagree with you that there is always more that can be done to raise awareness and to provide more education and support in schools and a wide range of other settings, early years, community settings, and like. There are a lot of other agencies similarly that do that probably better than local authority children's services do, like NSPCC, charities, and a whole load of others. So there's something about potentially, I think there's a wider discussion probably for us on at another point rather than this particular agenda item. But yeah, and happy, obviously you had a workshop and a presentation from Kerry Morgan, Service Director for Schools and Education, around pastoral care and support and the like. And that's maybe something we can explore going forward around the issue of how we support schools and other agencies around identifying abuse.
Thank you for that. Yes, Mr. Cowan.
Apologies if I'm mixing up the financial side with the report side, but thank you first of all for the documentation that was provided and for your short presentation there. I think there's several points that come to mind, and some do overlap. So again, apologies for that. But it seems quite important to me that you are actually trying to recruit, but in a very difficult environment in terms of recruiting social workers. When I was on the children's board of a large northern city 10 years ago, we had similar issues in terms of recruitment. So it's not a new aspect at all. But I think the idea of support, career progression, and making sure that you have, try and increase salaries where at all possible, and that will at least move some way towards solving the problem to an extent. I did wonder, it is a question about qualifications in my world in terms of education. Clearly the qualifications that are now has been established and are used for career progression. I just don't know about, social work. I'm sure you do. I would just say that if we can encourage the council, social workers to embark on the qualifications that are appropriate, then I think that also is a very good way of recruitment and retention. I also think that you also touched on this in terms of the structure of what you intend to do seems to be, to me, as appropriate as a complete novice and someone without the experience of social services. But it does seem to be appropriate, and I do think the point that was made about quality assurance and key performance indicators is crucially important. But I would also at the same time urge caution. And the question that I pose is, how do you quality assure without being drowned in KPIs, because that's happened in many, institutions in education, social services. So it's a key one. Yes, we all want quality assurance. We need quality assurance. It's crucially important, but actually the nature and structure of it is also crucially important if it's to be fit for purpose. I also noticed in your documentation that every 6 weeks, there's a report goes to the DFE?
There's an improvement board meeting every 6 weeks. Reports to the DFE are typically quarterly and a 6-month review.
And I just wondered if they were general or specific. In other words, do you churn out the same headings for each report, or do you highlight specific areas so that you could, I'm just trying to think on my feet in many ways. In other words, looking at, in particular, say, career progression one time, and looking at quality assurance the next time, and looking at budget, viability and long-term budget viability another time, and that might make it easier for these meetings. And I also think it's excellent that you mentioned sharing good practice. And I would look. You clearly have already looked at the structuring of statistical neighbours in terms of how they operate, and that whole thing of sharing good practice, learning from good practice, is clearly a way forward. And that's as again, for someone in the first meeting, I think that's very pleasing to see. That's a high priority. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a key question there about quality assurance and KPIs and how you make sure they don't actually block things actually up on the ground, about being pragmatic. That was the key question, I think, wasn't it?
And there was another one about training linked to recruitment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Social worker is a protected status. So to become a social worker, you must do a degree course and qualify. So that's the kind of the first entry level qualification. And yes, we're currently looking. So a number of our social workers choose to do practice education awards, which is again linked to universities, and potentially master's degrees and PhDs indeed. So we're looking at how we can link some of that in the future to career progression and extending our learning and development opportunity for those, but also not just for social workers, because we've got a workforce that has alternative skills and experiences, and not just social workers. And the KPIs, so we're going to touch, similar to Councillor Mannion's question, but we'll touch on KPIs and measures that matter in the next agenda item. But we literally have hundreds of KPIs, most of which are set by the Department for Education, and on which we report at least annually through the census on child in need and looked after children. And then there's a report that's been to this committee before, the CHAP report, which is the Children's Services Analysis Tool, which is based on all the indicators that you would typically see in an Ofsted inspection as well. So there's a plethora of those. Those don't stop, but they are hard to access, I think, unless you're used to seeing them every day and really know what they're telling you. And that's a conversation we've had with this committee before. And in the next agenda item, I'll say a little bit about measures that matter, a smaller number of measures that will give us a clear indication that improvement is embedded and improving going forward.
Thank you for your maiden scrutiny question. I'm sure there'll be many more. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. That's a lot of extra staff that are going to be taken on, and I just wondered, what are that you're trying to recruit? What is it actually based on? Is it based on the demand that was created at the end of last year, or just what those numbers, those 15 and those 12 social workers and stuff like that? And also, what, in your opinion, what is the key to the success of the service? Because you put service managers are the key in the report, but is it all of them intertwined?
Yeah, it's far more than just the service managers. But the point I was highlighting was that reintroducing the service managers has been absolutely critical and influential in helping us to get a grip on performance and driving that. So most of the additional posts are already in post because we added them in the period kind of September through to end of March. So much of that investment is a continuation of that additional resource and absolutely reflecting that significant rise in demand that we saw in the latter part of last year. Typically, you would expect to see that demand plateau and fall, and then steady to what should be the normal, if you like, volume of work that you would expect to see in a local authority this size. We should have a clearer indication of that as we come out of the summer and go into the next term, which is why we'll review that in October, and that will determine what capacity we need for the year ahead. But in terms of the business support posts, the newly qualified and the like, they aren't yet recruited. We're just about to start the recruitment process for those posts.
Okay. I'm just looking at the table when on additional resources approved by the council. I just wondered why the figures from 2021 to 21-22, 22-23, external legal fees that dropped considerably from 525 to 325. Human resources support has dropped from 364 to 289. When I would have thought that would have been even more important with additional staff requirements. And then just insurance and transformation, 292 dropping to 85,000. I mean, these are quite significant drops, but I would have thought those would have been maintained where they are, or yeah, at least that. I just explain a bit on that.
So some of that. So if you recall, council shortly after the High Court judgment was published last year, and then council immediately chose to support the implementation of the improvement plan, and I think £5.2 million investment into that. A large proportion of that investment went into legal, which has been touched on already, and HR to support the activity that was needed at that particular time. Where our HR colleagues and where our legal team colleagues have identified that they needed to keep that extra capacity, that was picked up through their budget proposals that went through the normal process and council in February. We weren't able to fit with that timescale, so this doesn't include additional resources for HR and finance. That was picked up by them through the MTF in the budget proposal last year. So you see the reduction here, but they've managed to continue that either as business as usual or a separate bid.
Okay.
Just
one last question.
Okay.
Yeah, just you put some statistics up there at the end. Would you have any numbers on those? Because you put up 486% on section 47 and ICPC up 500%. Are they just, as percentages, they look, pretty alarming, but I just wondered, was it one the year before and then gone up to 3 or 4?
No, the numbers were, the numbers weren't exceptionally high the year before. What I'll do is, if I may, rather than try to do some figures off the top of my head and apparently getting that wrong, I will do you a written response and circulate it to members of the committee. So Bart does a lot of the detail there, so we'll make sure we circulate that slide, but with some actual numbers.
Yeah, it just looks alarming, but it might only be gone from 1 to 5.
No, the numbers are quite alarming.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'll come back to Councillor Kenyon when the other councillors I'll come back to you when the other councillors ask their question. Councillor Hanson.
Yes, thank you very much. Listening to the workshop and today, I do have confidence in that we seem to be moving forward in a positive way. I remember the first Your Voice Matters meeting I went to. There was a young care leaver and she was waxing very lyrical about how dreadful the social workers were and how terrible it was and the awful time she'd had with the social workers, etc., etc. And after all that, I asked her the question. I said, what in training, what would you like to be if you had a job that you would like to do? And she said, I want to be a social worker. So, to obviously to go to that sector of a young, you might find wonderful, fertile social workers in the making, because they've been through the system. That's just what I wanted to say. Is there money in this 11 million? Is there any money at all for youth workers locally? Because we could do with youth workers in the towns.
So I'll work my way backwards. No, there's no money in this proposal for youth workers. That youth work isn't the core business of a statutory children's social care service. I don't disagree with you that we need to think about the provision for youth across Herefordshire, and obviously that will fit in with my broader corporate director for children and young people role. But this proposal is very much about the improvement for children's social care services. And whilst for a whole load of reasons, I wouldn't support launching a proactive campaign talking to children in care and care leavers. Actually, there are a lot of very, very, very good social workers and managers who have experience of having been in care. And I think that's a personal choice based on their own life experiences, their experiences of social work. But yeah, I mean, there are children that I used to be a key worker to many years ago when I worked in residential that went on to become social workers as well. On one level, it's heartwarming and gratifying, but they need to make their own choices. And the experience they bring almost in all cases adds value to their function and their role as a social worker.
Okay.
Thank you. And I've written down care knowledge and signs of safety model. would we be able to see what those are as a committee?
Yes, we could perhaps build that into a workshop in future around some of the practice tools that we use, possibly. Yeah, certainly we can
Once again,
we can
what were those
easily.
asked for?
With care knowledge and signs of safety model.
Okay, great. We can have that back to the committee at some point.
So-
Do we put a timeline to that and when we want it by?
Well, I guess it'll fit in with your forward plan in terms of if it's a workshop. Signs of safety is a practice model. It would need to kind of work through what that means and demonstrate that. We've got some very good people who can do that with you. Care knowledge is simply a website that we have access to. We can just give you access from.
Okay.
Yeah, and send you the link.
Starting to learn from our applying the SMART model, time scales and when actually done by. Thank you for that, Darryl. Councillors online, Councillor Pagan, I don't know if you wanted to ask a question or make an observation with a question at the end while you're there. You're on mute.
Apologies, my space bar wasn't working. No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Andrews, thanks for joining us. I see you're there now. Any other questions you'd like to ask? You're on mute. Can you hear us, Councillor Andrews? I can see you're there up on the screen without your picture.
So I am. I couldn't find the right button to press.
Okay, we got you there.
No, I've got no questions. Thank you. I think the questions have been asked that I was going to raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kenyon, you had another point to raise.
Yeah, just in the meantime, I'd just like to set Councillor Jansen's mind at rest. Hereford City Council, we support care workers. Slip my mind. Basically, Close House, we support them with support workers there, and we do a lot of other things beside. We support a manager down at Hinton Community Centre, and we also supply things that they need. So the City Council is doing lots of things in support of what Herefordshire Council does. Perhaps speak to Leominster Town Council, Ross, Kington, see what they're doing. Parishes, there's all sorts of things that could be done with parish. The City of Hereford is a parish council, and we're stepping out and seeing where there's issues, and we're helping out. So perhaps the other towns in the county can do the same. Come to the point, just a question I'd like to make, because when you talk about budget, it kind of opens up everything, doesn't it? So nothing's off the table, which I kind of like. Senkos in schools. Now, there's always been a bit of a, well, it may well have been, I hope it's improved, I'm telling you I'm completely wrong earlier, but waiting times for children to be statemented. If a school Senko thinks there's an issue with a child, what are the waiting times now for or anyone in that, for that matter, picks up that the child perhaps needs statements and there might be an issue? What are the waiting times around that at the moment?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that data to hand at the moment. What I'll do is I'll come back to the written answer, if I may. So, and you need statements for education needs rather than education, health and care plans.
Yeah, basically, the Senkos pick some of that thing, what isn't quite right, and then social services get involved, because without a statement, you cannot do anything. The schools can't access any additional funding to help that child. So if that is a slow process, if you're getting these additional workers in, perhaps some of them can be diverted down that little rabbit hole to improve that.
I'll ask Kerry Morgan, Service Director for Education, to respond to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I've got several questions to ask, please. First of all, on the first report on paragraph 4D, it talks about the resources board monitoring the spend and value for money. Could I ask, how often does that resources board report? And what are the metrics measures it's going to use? Are those going to be shown as an improvement later? Or is that something we should ask you to provide for us?
They'll certainly be reported to the improvement board and also in the quarterly cabinet reports. So there's a project management approach being introduced at the minute for all of those new and additional posts funded. So it'll report against how many of them are actually recruited to, at what rate, is it more or less than we budgeted, any vacant posts, any slippage, Yeah, I saw a monster spreadsheet earlier this week. So yeah, there's a very robust project management approach to that spend, and that will be reported through the improvement board and the quarterly cabinet reports.
With a copy of that for the committee to scrutinise.
Yeah, if that's again, we're discussing the forward work plan, so it's just trying to make sure that sequence.
I think it's come across some several questions that seeing the actual metrics and measure what's been measured and how those metrics are changing either way over time is one of the key things we'd expect to scrutinise on over. And if that report's every 3 months, then that would imply that we should be looking at those figures every 3 months as well.
Yep.
My second question, what is a contingency plan if you don't recruit? I looked at the budget and I can't see there's a contingency plan if we don't actually recruit our own. I presume the contingency plan we have to recruit more interim staff. How will that impact on budget? Is there somewhere in there a contingency for having to get the staff if we can't find a recruit our own?
So I said most of the staff that are supported by the transformation project are already in post. So that's not a risk currently, other than, so we haven't historically had any difficulties recruiting newly qualified social workers. We've been very good at that in the past, so I don't anticipate there being a struggle there. There's a risk and a challenge to us in recruiting business support colleagues, as I mentioned earlier on, because of the entry grade that we've got. So the worst case scenario is actually the risk is if we're not able to reduce our reliance on agency staff at the end of this year, and so that would mean there'd be a higher pressure potentially in next year on the budget. So most of the people we've already got in post as locums, that's not a risk for us. We need to hang on to them and try to convert as many permanent posts as we can. The risk will be if we aren't as successful as we hope we will be in recruiting during the year, and that will apply a greater pressure on the budgets next year.
So what you're saying is we don't need a contingency this year for that because we've covered it.
Yeah. So the contingency is built in essentially because we've assumed that many of these agency colleagues will be agency colleagues for 6, 9 or 12 months in the modelling, whereas if we can recruit permanently sooner than that, then our costs will be reduced during the year.
So there may have to be a contingency in next year's budget if we're not able to recruit and build our own staff.
Yes, certainly if demand continued to be as high as it currently is.
Okay, and that will be taken into account when we look at next year's budget.
Yes.
Okay, so my third question, I'm not quite sure if this is quite right, but in table appendix A, table 1, you've got a table of all the different headings under which costs would be spent, transformation costs. Says the interim staff 890 last year, 890 this year, but that was 5.22 million. Is there a similar table you can use for the 11.49 million? How that breakup would look?
We can certainly ask our finance colleagues to produce a similar, kind of simplified table in terms of broad headings, certainly when we do that update next for the resource.
At the moment, so I think that's definitely something that would be really useful, so we can see a comparison. And my last question is wanting to come back to us. Well, you've already, apart from the staff issue and recruiting, which you know is obviously the greatest challenge, what do you feel are things we should be looking at together and other issues that challenge us that we should be scrutinising and looking at, that we should keep close attention? Are there sort of 2 or 3 other things other than staff that we should particularly look at? Those have been several questions about where the key challenges, and it would be good to identify this together now and say, yes, it would be good, and we'll do a 3-month review to look at these 2 or 3 key areas particularly. I think Councillor Jones has taken us down that line, but there must be 1 or 2 particularly key things other than the staff that it would be really useful to monitor, which might indicate success for the rest of the programme.
So
we think about it.
I think I'll certainly think of it as the meeting goes on. So we've got the second agenda. I think this links very closely to the next agenda item as well, which is the improvement plan and measures that matter. So I think workforce and all things workforce is something that I think it would be helpful for scrutiny to think about and scrutinise more, possibly through the activity of a task and finish group, so that scrutiny can spend quite a lot. I think there's a real benefit to members spending time with frontline practitioners and their managers, as well as with service users. So there's something about the broader workforce issues, and I think scrutiny can bring something really quite valuable to the debate. There's certainly recruitment as part of that. So again, how do we make sure we position ourselves as a competitive employer going forward? there's a focus on impact rather than KPIs. So what difference are we actually making rather than are we doing things faster and better? So I think we need to develop that narrative with scrutiny over the coming months so that we have assurance that actually the experience for children and young people and their families in Herefordshire is improved and improving.
Can we, we've captured those for future reference? James, you've got those captured, great. So we can actually come back and future scrutiny and say, these areas we agreed in addition to staff we particularly should be looking at scrutiny. Thank you. Before we move on to our conclusions, Councillor Tumby as the lead member, is there anything you'd like to add or comment on? Oh, sorry, there was another question. Councillor Anson.
No, I was just going to say, would task and finish group go under the recommendation? And a recommendation for a task and finish group?
On what?
On what Darryl was talking about?
Yeah, well, we'll come back to formulating our conclusion in a second. I just want to ask Councillor Tumby in the comments, and we'll ask members to make those suggestions. Councillor Tumby, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Just very briefly, I was really pleased that over the past few weeks, councillors, fellow councillors have had so many opportunities to hear about this investment and to ask questions. Everybody's had a chance to really understand this investment, and I'm really grateful for that. It was a big ask, and I'm very grateful for the support that I've received, from across the council. And I think a lot of colleagues have understood the impact that we're trying to make up for now of underinvestment in the past, which in my opinion was a mistake. So as Darryl has set out, this is an investment in people, and that's what's really important. We're investing in people. I'm pleased that we're also investing in admin support, which is really important, that our family support workers and our social workers get the right kind of admin support. And again, career development, which this is also overdue, what we're doing now with career development. And not just if you're a social worker or family support worker, but also if you work in admin, it's a great opportunity to become specialised and have a really great career path and a really satisfying job working in our children's services. And finally, yesterday, we had our review with DFE about our improvement plan. And I know this overlaps with our next agenda item, but I just wanted to say that this investment, they could see from this investment that it is evidence of our commitment. So that was really positive as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Right, members of the committee, as at the beginning I said that what we should be asking ourselves, do we understand where the money is to be spent? If not, do we need more clarification? Do we know the performance improvements expected by budget line? If not, do we want more information on that? What more information do we actually need, and when do we want to receive information from either the executive officers on the actions that we are now going to come to conclusions on? So we've already agreed that we will send copies of the employment contract so we can see the terms under which social workers are engaged to be sent to the committee. We've also agreed that the table 1 in the Appendix A, see if that we can get that replicated for the increased budget, so we can understand how they compare. So that's 2 actions that we would like to be delivered on for us. We also have got from Darryl the key weaknesses, areas that we should be scrutinised in future. So we need to remind ourselves of those and put this down in our action tracker when we come to review the performance measures in every 3 months in line with how often they're reported. And also, which come out often, which you have said will be coming out, when we look at the improvable, it's important to capture it here. We do actually need to know what the metrics that are being used, the measurements, and if they'll be monitored, as we said earlier. So just to capture it, but we might be right in that, I know, in the next section. You, Councillor Anson, mentioned about tax and finish group. What would your proposal be on that?
Well, sorry, my mind's gone blank. Somebody suggested a task and finish group would be a good way of dealing of looking at the when you were speaking,
Yeah, perhaps I can-
Darryl, yes,
so-
and
so
I've lost the.
It was a task and finish for, because I think in the past, members have expressed an interest and a desire to meet with more of the workforce, and that hasn't always been possible in this kind of arena. So a task and finish activity focused on retention and recruitment and wider workforce issues, I think would be quite helpful. It'll give you an opportunity to meet with a wide range of practitioners, not just in my service, but possibly in some of the partner agencies as well, to look at how we work together. But also, I think our workforce would appreciate the attention and the focus that you'll give.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good question. And we did agree actually at the workshop you offered that any members of the committee, you would find opportunities when it was possible for one or more committee members to come along with you to meet staff. So we should capture that as a conclusion, that whenever possible, members of the committee should be invited, opportunities to actually go and meet staff and talk to them so we can see for ourselves and their feelings about how well we improve. So we can capture that in the reduction. Thank you for reminding us of that, Councillor Summers. I'm coming back to you, Councillor Kenyon.
I would prefer the task and finish group on that whole thing rather than be sporadic. I think we need to have a formal task and finish on the way our frontline workers are treated and how we're going to get new staff, et cetera, et cetera. It really needs to be ironed out. This is a problem that right across the country, not just Hereford, but I think we need to have a task and finish group to iron it out because it's been going on for quite some time. Maybe we can come up with some ideas. So it needs to be formal.
Michael Carr, you'd like to make a comment on that?
So I'd like to suggest the committee might want to consider bringing back a proposed terms of reference and membership scope for a task and finish group around this area to the next meeting. So we hope produce a draft of that, unless this is time sensitive, and then after the next meeting, site visits and task and finish procedure can be mapped out, and the report plan to come back to the next committee, to the meeting after that.
Okay, thank you. I know it's already in our constitution that we can set up task and finish groups and have that. That's not in this iteration of the committee. Would you be happy if we work with Clark and Michael and Matthew on putting together task and finish group?
They're the professionals.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to be guided, but just think we need it.
Yeah, so we'll look at the constitution when it says produce a task and finish group which meets that particular requirement of meeting and stuff. Personally, I think having a task and finish group to look now what the current position is would be a really good thing to do. But I think we should also take up the offer sporadically when it's convenient to say, look, we're having this meeting and staff, we'd like to come. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we could do both. So keep that in mind. But in the urgent action is to set up a task and finish group so we can assess for ourselves as soon as possible what the mood is of the people working for us, which is what the key point you're both making, I think.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned for the staff if they have one of us alongside us, they're doing their job. They might think we're checking up on them. I'm not. Yeah, they don't need any more checkups. They've had quite a few in the past year and a half. I think I think it's too early to be going alongside them and saying what they're doing. It's not good for them, I don't think, and we're not going to learn that much from it. We can talk to our officers if we need to know more, but I think those staff right now need to make themselves comfortable in the position they're in without us chasing them. Thank you.
All right, now, Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to pick up what Councillor Summers said, just get yourself in the barrel at tea time on a Friday. You can speak to quite a few social workers and you get to glean quite a lot of information. Obviously, other pubs are available. A large portion of this money has been spent on the legal team. I'm just coming back to this, and you have little or no control over that. Now, is there a breakdown? So I missed it. Is there a breakdown of how that's actually going to be spent?
So can I just clarify, a large portion of last year's money was spent on the legal team, not the 11.5. There's nothing in the 11.5 million for the legal team. So it's of the original 5.2 that council agreed in April last year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. But in hindsight, then we should now have some figures about how that's working and how did that reduce with more social workers coming in and more work being produced potentially for social workers. Is the legal team is it structured now to be able to cope with that?
So I might ask Ruth, who's on the line, to also comment on this one if Ruth's able. But in my opinion, certainly, so the number of applications to court, the number of proceedings has risen during the year. The courts report the timeliness and quality of our work has improved as the year's gone on. The legal team, obviously this happened before I arrived, but the legal team has additional posts, including Ruth's post, which is around improvement. In my experience and my observation since I've been here, the legal team has been adequately resourced and is working well and working closely with senior managers and practitioners in children's services. I think most people that were here before me would say that wasn't the case a year ago.
So you feel it's money well spent then?
I personally do, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Any other councillors want to add anything? All right, James, I think we can sum up what conclusions we've come to. I think you agree there are 4. One was that we obviously want to see more metrics and measures that are being used to monitor performance of the resources board and look at those quarterly. That was one. Another one was that we wanted a table, as in Appendix A, for the 11.49 million and how that's been spent by transformation cost area. Thirdly was that we had the list of KPIs other than staff recruitment. Now they expressed that we wanted to make sure we were aware of that, we scrutinise particularly when we look at these figures again, probably on a quarterly basis. You got that one okay? And the fourth one was that we set up a task and finish group to meet the frontline workers with officer advice to do that. I think those are the 4 conclusions that we came to. Would everybody agree?
Chair, just a point of clarification. I think the first, I think we've got those correctly, but the first 3 are information requests from the committee. The proposal set up a task and finish group. What I was going to suggest is that the committee decide to consider the terms of reference and membership for such a task group at its next meeting. That will give us a chance to consider with the department what that task group should look at, when, and what it should do.
So we agree the terms of it, and then
So if we could bring that to the next meeting.
bring it back to, so I had to bring it back to the next meeting.
That's what I suggest.
I can add to that. If you don't mind, thanks for that, Michael, because one of the things with task and finish is we need to have clerks that are well qualified for this, and because it's hard to manage. So that would give Daryl and Michael a chance to decide which direction they want to go in, because it has to be managed correctly. If it's not managed correctly, we're banging our head against the wall. Okay, that's from personal experience. So
We'll making the same points there, and we do have a way in which we meet together regularly to work this out. So we can just add to that, James, to bring it back to the next meeting. Do we want to go through those again? Are you all happy with that? Someone propose that we accept those 4 recommendations and conclusions?
there's the employment contract. I'm not sure if you
No, I put that in there. It's one of the items in there. Somebody propose that we accept those. One of us 4. Councillor Summers.
Is James putting it up on the screen?
Sorry.
Are we getting to see them on the screen? Normally we see them.
No, we can't at the moment. No. I reckon you can read them out again if you wish, to be sure. Would you like that?
No. I just.
We do normally try and get them up, but James is actually acting as our democratic officers. He's at control of the system and the clerk at the moment. So.
He's not been put in the naughty corner.
But yet something to know, put them on the screen does help us to make sure we read them. But I think it's pretty clear. Are you happy to second that then?
Yeah.
Second, thank you. All those in favour? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that's item 8 on the agenda completed. Before we move on to item 9, would everybody like a 5-minute pump break? Do you agree to that? Okay. We'll take a 10-minute break. It's now 16:06. We come back at 1:15. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, with me.
Thank you.
Sam Cronky, Jen. How you feel? How you feeling?
Thank you.
We're live, Chair, thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Right, we're moving on to item 9 on the agenda, which is Children and People's Improvement and Progress Update. Again, just as an introduction on that, comments I made earlier about the previous item, what I suggest we're trying to look at is, do we understand that, are we happy with the improvement plan activities and actions with performance measures in place so we can monitor progress in line with the improvement plan and the conversation a few minutes ago. So can I please invite Freeman to present this item, and you're going to be supported by Bob Bellier and Matthew Sampson.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have seen both prior to the meeting and then also as part of the meeting pack, a copy of the draft improvement plan. So it's not yet a complete improvement plan. I'll talk you through the principles of that, but not the detail of it. I'm sure you'll have questions about some of the content. And then certainly Bart, as the improvement lead, has been leading on the kind of collating the feedback from various members and stakeholders and other agencies. We'll be able to comment on some of the emerging themes from that feedback. And Matthew and other members of the leadership team in Children's Services have obviously been instrumental in helping us to shape and develop that plan. So between us, we'll hopefully be able to answer questions that you may have. I'll take you through some headlines. So this is the first review of the original improvement plan. If you remember, back in October, Council signed off a strategic and an operational plan, and that was shortly after I'd arrived here. So I kind of inherited two plans. This brings them together. It frankly is much more outcomes focused, and it seeks to have a simpler reporting and governance structure as we move forward. The plan is a live document. We kind of wrote that into the proposal that went to council back in October, and we undertook to review it in spring this year. And we expect that it would be considered at least and reviewed at least twice a year to make sure that it stays relevant. We will get feedback from service users. We'll get feedback from regulators and inspectors. We'll get feedback from our audits and quality assurance activities. So it's right that we keep refreshing it and checking that it's still relevant and pertinent to what we know and what we need to improve. I kind of want to stress at this point, because anticipating possibly some of the questions I might get asked later, it's a children's services plan. It's not a partnership plan. It's not a plan for the whole of the county and youth provision or everything else. Some of those plans will need to follow, but this is about the focus on improvement as related to our statutory improvement notice or non-statutory improvement notice and the future offset inspection. What we are at pains to try to do is not include everything that's business as usual. So children's services typically are a very busy directorate in any local authority. And we're trying not to repeat everything that says, you know, we'll publish an SEND strategy, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. That's what any children's service would do any year. And so we're trying to not include all of that. That's included in service plans and other activity. A key difference from this version and version 1 is that we had partnership as a standalone strand in the first one, and that really didn't work. Partners didn't really understand why they were part of a standalone strand of activity, and also it didn't make sense to them that we just weren't threaded through. So we know that we need to improve partnership working and the impact of partnership working, and we seek to thread that through the core activity within the programme. So it starts with a set of statements around what needs to improve. We know that from Ofsted feedback, from the High Court judgment, from our quality assurance activity last year, and then followed by outcomes to be achieved, and only then thinking about the activity that we need to do. And that's really quite different to the first version, which was really just about actions and transactions. So it had very little to do with outcomes. And I think that shift alone has been very widely welcomed by stakeholders and other agencies. So it's currently out for comment and feedback. It effectively becomes our working document though this week. That was the arrangement with the improvement board yesterday. And during next week, we will, with Bart and others, collate and consider the feedback we've had from a wide range of partners. And then we will determine finally the measures that matter that I will mention in a moment. And then it will go back to the improvement board. It'll be signed off by the operational board, which is a board that I chair, in mid-May, and then go back to the improvement board. It will come here as part of the next update on improvement and the like. And then, we'll review it in 6 months' time. Measures that matter. So we spoke about key performance indicators in the last agenda item, of which there are many, and we have limited influence over those. Most organisations count the things that are easy to count. It's easy to count how many assessments you've done. It's easy to count how many assessments you did in timescales. It's really hard to count whether or not those assessments were any good and whether they made a difference to children and young people. So that's that's where we're doing a lot of thought at the moment as to what might be the measures that matter, the measures that would tell you as scrutiny committee members, would tell me as the Director of Children's Services that we really are moving in the right direction in terms of improvement and improved outcomes for children and young people. So each of the measures that matter that we land on, we will have a baseline figure. So the figure nominally as of 31st of March this year, possibly the end of April, depending on the figure that the measure that we arrive at. And then what we expect that measure to be at the end of quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 this year. And we will set a target, for want of a better phrase, where we would expect ourselves to be, with a fair wind and a lot of effort. And we're certainly not giving ourselves easy targets in that process. And then we would expect to report to you and to Cabinet and to the Improvement Board. These don't replace the full range of KPIs. They remain in place. They're there for the DFE, Ofsted and others. So you still have the opportunity to ask for those kind of reports. So in the past, you've had the chat reports and various other dashboard reports. So you can still kind of have a menu of different performance reports throughout the year. And you've previously commented that arguably there's too much data. So again, it might be helpful, as Victor spoke on earlier on, is to say whether you want to focus in on a particular theme at different times during the year. And of course, the other indicator and feedback that we can't necessarily measure in typical ways that we measure data is feedback from service users again. So again, that might be a useful focus of a future task and finish activity. You spend time meeting and talking to service users, but perhaps later in the year when we expect some more of this stuff to be embedded, rather than to have 2 task and finish activities going at the same time. Possible measures that matter. So we genuinely haven't arrived at these yet because I didn't want to assume the outcome of the feedback we're getting from a broad range of stakeholders. So, but they might, for example, include. So some of these are things that you can count, and others we would have to think about how we measure some of these. Some of these we don't currently measure at all. So in terms of the audits that we do, and that Ofsted would see and would comment on, we do need to know something around the quality of our audits and the outcomes of those audits. That's a different, we don't do that as a KPI for the DFE or anywhere else. So I think the proportion of cases that are audited that are good or outstanding, you could set a lower bar than that in terms of the proportion that requires improvement or above. But we aspire to be good or outstanding in the future. Those numbers will be relatively low, to be just clear in the short term, but we need to be working on that. Similarly, we know that our engagement with children and young people, and that their voice, their views, their opinions, their contribution to assessments and plans has been relatively weak in the past. So again, why would we not focus in on the element of audits that tells us whether the voice of the child is strong, comes across in case records, and that they have indeed contributed to their assessment and plan. Caseloads is certainly something that we would expect to monitor. That's been a key priority action from Ofsted for some time now. So we want to set targets that further reduce the average caseload for social workers over the year. And also we'd expect those to report on the numbers of social workers that fall outside of that range. So again, the numbers of social workers, for in this instance, as an example, that had a caseload higher than 24 children. And churn has been a concern, so that the movement of social workers in and out of the service, and that's been a concern of this committee for a while. So again, reporting, for example, on the percentage of permanent workforce who've been in post for more than 12 months may well be helpful and will give us a clear indication of improving stability in the service. Supervision has been a key Ofsted priority action, so we would need to do some kind of measure that maps around that. But again, we already know that the frequency of supervision is improving because we've reported on that in various forums. So there's something there actually about the impact and the quality of supervision, which maybe the measures matter. And similarly, the number of children who are looked after by us, we've had more than 3 social workers in the past 12 months. And you're probably asking why 3? Why should that not be 1? So if you're a child that's come into services, you've come through the MASH and into the assessment team, that's your first social worker. You may then be a child in need for a period of time or subject to a child protection plan. So that would be a second social worker because there's a transfer there. you may come into care later in that year, and you may then legitimately have a third social worker in the year, because our teams are set up as disciplines and focus. So, but we could have two measures there. One is that for those that are recently accommodated, that have no more than 3 social workers. Those that have been accommodated for more than a year in our care for more than a year, we would only want them to have 1 social worker. So again, we can cut those in different ways. But again, that speaks to some of the feedback we've received from some young people in the corporate parenting board and others, and families telling us they see too many social workers and they want more stability. So, these are indicators of possible measures and where we're looking at. So these, I suspect, in the 4 sections of the plan, we may have, I don't know, 4 measures that matter for each of the sections. So maybe 16 in total measures that matter, 20 perhaps at the most. We'd produce those as a dashboard table that would come here to the improvement board and others. And they should give us quite a high level indicator across a range of metrics that some of the historic long-standing concerns that we've had about the service are being addressed and are improving, and that the experience for children and young people is similarly improving. So it needs to be a mix of what's the experience for service users, as well as what's the experience or the pressure and impact on our workforce and on workflow. So those are indicators. Those aren't necessarily going to be in the final cut, although some of them are quite strong indicators there. And we will do that piece of work finally next week. If I hand over to Bart in a moment. So the document's been out for about a month now. We've had quite a lot of feedback from a range of agencies and stakeholders. So perhaps if I can hand over to Bart and give you a bit of a theme or flavour of what's coming in. Councillor Summers, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah.
Thank you, Darryl. Question from Councillor Summers.
Just a concern, really. I've been on looked after children's committees for 5-6 years now. I've never been happy with the whole situation. Usually just told stuff and then we don't get it. We don't allow the young people to get involved. Now, from what I can understand, if we talk to the young people, they'll tell us what problems are. In the last meeting we had, they told us quite a few problems. One of them had a whole number of carers over a particular time, which was quite surprising. So we seem to be doing 2 things here. We got the looked after children's committee. We got you. I'm not sure if we were doing them, but now I know the looked after children's is changing, a new format. I'd like to see what that is. We hope to see it soon, but I'd like it to be more discussion on it and to know more, because what you're saying is combining with that. So, and there's a real issue with looked after children. Thanks.
So the new arrangements for corporate parenting board would be happy to bring to scrutiny at some point in the future. So that corporate parenting board meets tomorrow with the LGA. So they're doing a workshop, a training event, much as similar to one that scrutiny members have been doing with the LGA. I think we're really pleased to see a small but very focused group of members who will be the core of that corporate parenting board. I'm not going to speak for Councillor Toynbee because she's here in the room, but I think she and I are broadly very pleased about the direction that's going in. We've got a really good draft of the corporate parenting strategy, which the service and other agencies have been working on. So feel confident about that. I think the measures that matter and the improvement plan aren't at all contradictory or out of odds with that. One of the reasons we're talking about changes in social worker as a potential measure that matters, because we were listening to those young people in that forum. We've got an emerging and stronger relationship with Your Voice Matters and other groups. So I personally, I feel quite confident about the direction we're going in right now. I think you're right, it has perhaps been stuck for a little while. Certainly what we're suggesting in the plan and the measures that matter aren't in any way in our opposition to the work of corporate parenting.
So my next question, if you wouldn't mind, is when will the ones that the people who are already on that committee have been on for quite some time, when will they be informed of what's going on now with this new procedure? Because too often I think we're being left in the dark and we have to try and guess on what's going on or try and get feedback on it. It's not coming to us without a fight. It seems to struggle. I'm not sure if that's right.
So I'm sorry if that's your experience. I wasn't aware that was your experience, or that others might feel the same. So and I'll pick up an action that I update, or that with Councillor Toynbee we update all members. We were planning in any case to do an update at the next all members briefing, which I think is towards the end of next month. So I'll make sure that we provide them comprehensively.
Okay, any other councillors' questions before we move on to Bart's presentation? Okay, Bart, over to you.
Thank you. So we've had some really a wide variety of feedback from members, from the police, from voluntary agencies, from health partners. Some of it has been really considered and really comprehensive, and we're really grateful for that feedback, because that allows us to reflect and to kind of see how we can incorporate that. There's a number of themes, so people commented on the format of the plan, so they really like the fact that the outcomes are more central in this version of the plan. There was comment about the structure, about the wording, about the phrasing, all sorts of aesthetically, so we need to consider those. And then a more meaty, if you like, feedback was in respect of the outcomes and the measures. So what measures can we use? What's the right measures? Some of them are really helpful. Some of them possibly we need to carefully consider how to measure effectiveness. Some of those things that we need to think about. There was quite a lot of feedback about early help or preventative services. So what can we do to strengthen or make more robust the provision before statutory children's services? So that's early help, both provided by the local authority, but also provided by partners. I need to reflect back on Daniel's point that he made before, that this is children's services plan. And so we need to kind of consider what we can incorporate and what we need to kind of take action on outside the plan. And then there was a raft of comments, if you like, in respect of the partnership, how we could strengthen the partnership. Can we do more things together? Could we use resources together in a more constructive manner? Could there be quality assurance more together? How we use data, could that be done on a multi-agency level? And how the improvement plan links in with the Safeguarding Children partnerships, with corporate parenting boards, and with the other structures that are already there. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the majority of feedback really that we've received so far from Colin.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that complete the presentation?
It does. Happy to take questions.
Any questions from any members of the committee? Well, I'll start with the questions with which says more outcomes focus clearly, but there's still measures to be added, isn't it? Will that be in a version 3 then? And if so, when will that be produced?
No, it will be, we will land on the measures that matter, hopefully by the end of next week. And then that updated version 2, effectively, because that's the bit that's missing from there at the minute, will be recirculated to each of you, all the stakeholders that we publish on the website. That will be our working plan. So there'll be a kind of a brief period for comment if people feel we've got those measures wrong. But otherwise, that's it. So the core of the plan is our working document. It will be updated and refreshed next week, and then it will be published. It will just be made available to people. What I don't want is a plan that changes every 2 or 3 weeks. That's not helpful for anybody. So it will just be, because the arrangements are that it's a plan that's signed off by the operational board. It isn't signed off by IHE or cabinet, because it doesn't quite work that way. But it will be scrutinised by you and by cabinet.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So essentially, it's a draft plan. We had a lot of comment, as you said, quite a number of people, both within and outside for the organisation. That will be updated. It will remain version 2, but it will become the final version.
It will become the final
with the measures included.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Andrews, so you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was really quite pleased to hear what I've heard today. So I think the challenges we've put you previously to make a good improvement plan and to improve what we've seen have been listened to. So congratulations, Darryl. I think that's a really good bit of work. Thank you. The bit I want to ask now is, like, I'm buzzing everybody with pace and urgency to get things done quicker within this council. So I'd like to know, when's the first time we're going to see what you think is going to be a true reflection or review of your improvement plan where we're actually going to see it, so you can give us some deliverable feedback on where you think the gaps are and where you think you've seen successes, quick wins, or you've underestimated the challenges and need to go back to it.
Thank you. That's a good question. I think I think the key first point will be in July. So we see the quarter 1 data. So April, May, June, quarter 1. We need to collate that data. We'll need to report it back to Cabinet in order to request the release of that second tranche of transformation money. I think that will be a key date for us as well in terms of the improvement board, the DFE, and indeed Ofsted. We have our annual conversation with Ofsted in June, so that's losing the title. It happens once a year, but it's a key conversation with them, which informs their thinking around when they might inspect us and the key lines of inquiry. So I think that kind of period, June into July, will be quite key for us really, and kind of make sure we land the right messages, but also that we're showing that we genuinely are making improvement. I was pleased in the DFE review that Councillor Toynbee mentioned earlier on. There was some real acknowledgement of the improvement that we are making at the moment in terms of frequency of visits, frequency of supervision, timeliness of initial child protection conferences and things. There was some real acknowledgement of the work that we've been doing in recent months, as well as an acknowledgement of the challenges around recruitment. So I think July will be the first big review, and I think we need to make sure that we're, for me, I will want to make sure that we're showing demonstrable improvement over a period of months, and then again come September that's continued during quarter 2. We haven't just started to slip back again. We need to make sure that it's continual improvement.
Now, Councillor Fagan, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's also really good to see that partnerships are being highlighted in this plan, and obviously that's a crucial part of any success. What I wanted to ask is that the issue of the voice of the child, how do you envisage that this will be reflected in the plan? Because obviously, as the sort of service users, the impact of the improvement plan on them is going to be key to showing if it's actually successful or not. So how will that be sort of reflected in the plan and the sort of as it's reviewed?
So there are a number of outcomes and actions which are specifically about service user feedback and service user engagement, so that we create forums by which we actively engage rather than kind of receive passive feedback. The publication of our practice standards, which we developed and published last month, in the practice standards right the way through plans, assessments and a whole range of other activities, there's a real emphasis on making sure you capture the lived experience and the voice of the child in all of the work that we do. So as our practice improves, we should absolutely see that service user engagement. We would expect to see fewer complaints over time, more compliments. There's a whole range of measures there. And of course, the grant funding that we received from the Department for Education kind of prime the work that's currently underway to develop an engagement strategy. That work continues at the minute. It's about to conclude. We've continued the funding of that to make sure that work's progressed and concludes appropriately. And then we'll consider the recommendations from that piece of work in terms of thinking about what more can we do to encourage effective engagement with service users.
Answer your question okay, Councillor Fagan?
Yes, it does, thanks. I think that's very important for us as the scrutiny committee to be able to reflect back on that specific sort of bit of information, because that will sort of be the indicator for us as to sort of where we need to focus our attention.
Yeah, okay, we can note that for our conclusions and request for feedback, can't we? Thank you. Councillor Hamblin, you already hand up again.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to return to Darryl's response, really. I like July, that's nice, Darryl, thank you. However, like before that, we've got May and June. So I wouldn't want Councillor Toynbee to be sort of having to sort of back something back at the end of July with a an Ofsted report and items where you've been inspected and then finding out what's happened for 3 months. So what is the possibility of you feeding back what the performance is before that to the steering committee, either as written or with a visit to say, this is the performance we've had for May, this is the performance we've had for June, where you can sort of give us a heads up of where you think it's going. I wouldn't want to be surprised in July by seeing a poor performance.
No, and I hope you won't be surprised in July by seeing poor performance. I hope you'll be very pleasantly surprised by seeing some good performance. But yes, we report. So we report monthly to the operational board, which is chaired by me, every 6 weeks to the improvement board, which Councillor Howells observes, as well as Councillor Hewitt. And obviously, at the minute, your proposal is that you're still meeting monthly, but that may change, I guess, possibly. So we can bring performance reports to you as often as you would like, but certainly we have a whole range of performance measures each month. The measures that matter, we're only proposing to measure generally quarterly because of the way that we're going to structure them. But we can easily bring performance reports and an update from me or from one of the service directors each month, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that'd be really good. And the reason why I'm pushing it is obviously you're a high focus department that we need to change something on, and for us to sort of accept a loosely quarterly review or something, I think would be lapse of the scrutiny committee to allow you to do that. So I think we should support the cabinet member by making sure you report it more firmly and rigorously and regularly than quarterly, please.
Yeah, quarterly seems to be the obvious choice when the board itself reports about quarterly, as we said in the previous session. So quarterly feedback would be a period of time you can measure enough, but not onerous, but enough time for us to see whether change is actually happening in the right direction or not.
Yes, I think the Council Andrew's point is that we'd like to see something monthly in a different format. So yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, right, great. And that might be sent to committee members, not necessarily through a meeting, but we get it. So are you committed to that, to give us a monthly report then?
Yes, happy to do that.
Okay. That's an action we can capture. Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I think that's really important to capture that.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Darrell.
Councillor Anson, I think you had a question.
Yes, I've written down to ask about the corporate leadership team. And this contains a heading which I don't like, critical friend. I find that quite difficult. It's like you, friend comes up and says, oh, I'm so glad Johnny is asking you out, that's fantastic. What a pity your hairdresser decided to do that cut. You know, you're either a critic or a standby friend. So this sort of critical friend is just, I find, a bit difficult. But that's an aside. But it says that corporate leadership team provides scrutiny and challenge. Well, I thought we provided scrutiny. So please expand.
I was just reflecting on the use of an analogy about hairdressers directed at me. So I'll pass on that one. There's no shortage of anybody that wants to scrutinise the service and the plan. So you have a particular role within the Constitution to scrutinise us. I think the corporate leadership team is a critical friend. They certainly provide quite a lot of challenge in my monthly updates to them, so that they're fully sighted on the progress, the risks, the challenges, and the opportunities. Yeah, I think it's just scrutiny with a different. It's almost scrutiny with a small s from their point of view. They have a role to make sure that the progress that's been reported to scrutiny and to cabinet and the like is appropriate and on track. So yeah, they don't have a role the same as yours, but that doesn't mean they don't have a role to scrutinise me as a group of peers.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a good question, Councillor. So we actually asked that question at the first corporate board in terms of references put together. So there's a bit of confusion of the wording. I think it might be worth going back and looking at the wording and saying we monitor ourselves. I'd say we scrutinise, you monitor would be the way I'd probably express it. But I think it is confusing if the word scrutiny is used in lowercase. You might have to think about that. So I'd share that comment.
My service directors and heads of service get rather nervous on Monday afternoons when I scrutinise the performance data that gets published. So we all scrutinise in different ways. Yeah.
Okay, you made a point anyway. Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chair. I did a task and finish group a few years ago, and it had to do with care, children's care at nursery schools, etc. And we visited a couple doing this task and finish, and the biggest problem that most of the staff had, especially the managers, was keeping up with the paperwork the council wanted. So a question for you, Darryl, is do you have time to do the work between reports?
No.
That's
So an example today's been back-to-back meetings, committees or scrutiny. So no, I've got a good team around me, I have to say, and Matthew and Bart are on this call as well. They do quite a lot of the reporting on a whole range of things, so I'm grateful to them and others. But there is a real tension in the system at the minute. We're a heavily I was going to say scrutinised there. We're a heavily monitored service by a wide range of bodies and regulators, all of whom want their time and their meetings. And the reality for me and many other officers is that we end up dealing with our emails and other activity in the evenings and weekends. There's a truth to that.
And that's my concern. I think it's something we have as scrutiny committee members, we have to start realizing a little bit. There's so much going on. I'm on 3 scrutiny committees right now, and the officers are made to jump through hoops time and time again. And I'm just wondering if we're part of the problem when some of the things are falling by the wayside. And I just want to make sure that you're like the frontline staff. You need to make sure that you're comfortable in your position and you're not overworked. I'm not sure if there's any ways that can be eased. I'm sure most of the stuff that I think the biggest problem is that you have to lay out these documents to make them readable for us. If you could just put them out that was readable, period. I mean, even if they were in rough form, maybe you can cut back on the workload. And I really am concerned that there's too much of a workload for you guys. And that's also part of that 11 million. I'm sorry, but that costs money to do this. So yeah, it is an issue. Thanks.
Yeah, agree. I think we all know that. It's a good point. We need to make sure we're aware of it ourselves. Councillor Jones, did you want to add anything or ask any questions?
No, I'm fine. I've covered. Yeah, thank you.
I see you still got hands up, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Andrews. Did you want to come back, or were those old hands, as it were?
Oh, that's an old hand, sorry. I'll take that down now. Sorry.
That's okay. I've got a couple of questions. And in particular, I know you've mentioned it, Darryl, but back to the same question previously, you said there are some of the 16 measures that we're going to be getting in fire version 2 up to by 4 section, the measures that matter. Are there some key ones already that perhaps we're falling behind on? Or is it too early to say that? And should we expect to see those in our next quarterly review?
There are some that I don't yet know the answer to, because some of the measures that matter that we're landing on and we've had feedback about aren't things that we currently count. So I'll be as interested to see where we're at and what our baseline will be for some of that data. So we don't currently, for example, record the numbers of changes in social work over a year. So somebody's building that report for us at the minute, or we'll be doing very shortly. So I think, and then we need to think about, well, so what's that tell us now? And then where do we expect to be by the end of quarter 4 next year? So no, I think, the measures that matter that we arrive on, we will make sure that they're realistic but challenging for us as a service. But I'm not expecting at the minute any that's the whole point of doing a baseline at the end of March or during April. So that's our starting point. That's where we're at now. This is where we expect to be at quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So wait till we get the first quarterly report, and then we can look at the issues that may be particularly difficult and challenging.
Absolutely. And some will be a little bit slower to get traction and pace, I suspect, than others.
So could we say that the first report we could expect quarterly is by end of July? Would that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. That will coincide with the cabinet papers.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay. So we could capture that as something we can expect to see happen. Any other question of the councillor? Put your hand up. Oh, councillor, can I come back to you, councillor? So would you like to speak now?
Sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand up. I'll come in whenever you want me to.
I'll come back with it. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I wrote this question out quite a long time ago, and I've been listening. It's kind of been answered when you've been answering other questions. However, where else does this improvement plan go to? By the sound of it, goes to plenty of other places.
Yeah, so it's our improvement plan. We own it effectively, but you know, a copy of it, a copy of the draft has already been shared with Ofsted. Ofsted will comment on it, no doubt, when they come in inspectors, and at that point share an observation whether they feel it's focused on the right
Haven't had
things.
feedback yet. Have you passed up the chain? The government funding came in.
Yeah, so again, the DfE have had sight of this draft. It was mentioned briefly in the DfE 6-month review yesterday. So without kind of, I think there is a high degree of confidence in the direction that we're following at the moment.
Okay, and obviously it goes to cabinet and it goes to various different officers within. So we're looking at it right there across the board. Because the kind of point I'm looking towards is we have this come to us every 2 months, and I don't think there's a need for us to. We're almost all running down the same rabbit hole when potentially there's other things that could be scrutinised that's being missed out on. So I kind of feel that that's where we're going. Getting you guys in here every 2 months to tell us what's going on when you're already telling other people as well. So what's your feel on that? Would you, I'm kind of asking you, do you want less scrutiny? Would it help in what you do?
It's in the services interests for scrutiny to be effective, because that will help us drive improvement. I agree with you that sometimes there's a real risk that potentially we're bringing the same thing to you as we're taking to the improvement board and other bodies. And I think that's something that Councillor Howes and others have been in discussion about the last few weeks as well. So I think you're right. We need to make sure that there's a balance to be struck in the work of scrutiny, that it focuses on the stuff that's your business as usual development stuff, not just your improvement stuff.
So
I
skip ahead. When I read through, I read the thing on the day, I skip ahead. I'm going through to the work programme and I'm seeing it's appearing every 2 months in the work programme. And then there's another thing saying annual this, you've got to look at that. But actually it's not leaving us as a committee any light of foot to look into anything else that might be coming down the road. So that's where my concern lies, is there other things that are going on that nothing at all to do with this improvement plan, but things are going on we need to look at, because I think that's important too, because otherwise this committee starts to fail.
Sorry, we can answer that because we've already had discussions about the frequency of how often you hold these meetings for a start. So we're going to come back up, look at that on the work plan, and we've already, as Daryl's point, already started discussions about how frequently it should be made, how frequently you're fed back, and the other issues that we should be looking at, not just the improvement plan. So we'll have a bit of a discussion around that when we come back to the work program agenda. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine by me, John.
Okay, thanks. Did somebody else with Councillor, did you say you wanted to say something?
Me.
No? Okay. Councillor, I see your hands up again. Did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I was going to sort of agree with Councillor Kenyon there, to be honest, in the fact that I'm happy not talking about the improvement plan and the performance sort of KPIs in the scrutiny committee, as long as we're seeing them. So by all means, you can send them out 6 weekly and I'll review them. And if I think there's something to bring in, then I'll alert it. But I think I'm happy to scrutinise it in my own time and review them and get my own questions. But I agree with Councillor Kenyon that I don't need to see it on the agenda every time we have a scrutiny meeting.
Yeah, no, we agree with that. And under the work programme, we want to have a discussion around how often we meet and how we review information that we need to see without necessarily meeting. So it might, as you suggest, be a report. We'll come back to that under the work plan. I just wanted to add some comments that Councillor Hewitt, who sent her apology, said that she said she's puzzled we don't have target dates and results on baseline data. Well, I think we've covered that by the fact that version 2 will be amended to have the baseline data in.
We consciously wanted people to focus on the outcomes and the measures rather than the data side. We excluded them from the version that went out for consultation.
I think you've answered that. And the second point she made probably hasn't been answered. So she likes the clarity about the lead officer responsible, but she'd like to see more information about the team of professionals who will help the lead officer. So we understand the mechanics of improvement. Is that something you could do for us? We've got the organogram of the whole children's services, but she's talking about the improvement plan particularly.
I think not in the plan. I think we can think about that in the way that we report, but again, within one outcome there may be multiple actions, and those actions might be scattered across different parts of the council, or it need partner agencies. So I think that becomes a little unwieldy, to be honest, to be able to do it in that way. But we can certainly think about that in the way that we report about who's involved in the work. But most of that activity will be managed by the operational board and the improvement board.
We'll have the organogram, which should be a living document and updated as people move.
Yeah.
Couldn't there be something like a star against the name to say also involved in improvement plan, something like that?
I'll give some thoughts to that.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think it's quite as easy as you described, but we'll give some thought to it.
It isn't, and that's what the problem. We've got the organogram, but even so, it's still really difficult to know who does what job.
Yeah.
So when we come to these meetings, for example, we're not quite sure what they do and where they fit in the hierarchy. You can't look at everybody, but the organogram is quite useful. There might be some ways we can answer. Let's have a think about that. Anyway, at least reflected the question she wanted asking. Okay, I think we finished the debate. Before we come to our conclusions, Councillor Tonby, would you now like to add any thoughts you've got, please?
Yeah, thanks everybody. That was all very useful. Yeah, I'm really pleased with the measures that matter, that it's going to be very plain English, and that we've had so much engagement, so many people feeding back on it. So that's really positive. On what was raised by committee members about the corporate parenting, yeah, we have as I think you're aware, Philip, we now have a focused group with a representative from each of our political groups as councillors, to form a core group on the board so we can be more focused. And as far as relating with the scrutiny committee is concerned, we've got Helen on the board, which is great. So you have a member on the board, and also via your political groups, you will also be able to get feedback and feed in. And obviously we're always all very happy to hear any suggestions and ideas you have. I agree with Councillor Fagan about the importance of the voice of the child, and that is something that I always have at the forefront of my mind. I agree with Councillor Andrews about updates between meetings, you know, that it's useful to get background information. Not everything has to come formally to a meeting in the form of a formal, specially written report. And I agree with Councillor Summers about the balance between professionals being able to get on with their work and spending time reporting on it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's worth just, I think, elaborating. People might wonder why all the corporate parent board meetings were all cancelled. And I think we all know that now. We've changed it to a more focused group, but just so people might be listening in, members of the public, etc., it's because we've reviewed it and there's now a more focused group, exactly what you said. We're still doing it. It wasn't as if it all went away. It's just that we're doing it in a way that's more focused, exactly as you indicate. I think the model of having a committee member sitting on something like the corporate parent board and maybe other areas of activity feeding back to the committee, rather than the committee having to look at everything and having fewer meetings, more focused, but having that feedback from groups like the corporate parent board and maybe even partner groups as well, who represent the committee on those groups and report back, rather than necessarily those groups coming in and report to this committee with some reports which don't necessarily have to come to the committee. And that's the sort of thing we're looking at in looking at our work activities over the coming months in the future. So all that's quite useful. The other thing I wanted to add, what question you had asked about early help, send and fostering, which have come out as being areas that aren't reflected necessarily in the improvement plan and the budget, but there were focused areas for the budget, were there? So we know that needs to be done, but it isn't the focus at the moment. I think that was the answer you gave, Darryl, wasn't it, when people asked that question?
Yes, so fostering's got its own service development plan. So it doesn't, and as you would expect it to have, so it doesn't, again, that's part of the business you use and stuff, so you wouldn't see that in an improvement plan typically, although it is in the transformation paper, because obviously that clinical psychologist post. SEND is currently being reviewed at the minute. We expect the local government association to lead a peer review just before the summer, and the feedback from that, coupled with the education green paper that was published recently, we will then over the summer look at our SEND provision and review that, and if there's additional resource or a change resource that's required next year, we'll approach that through the midterm financials and address that. Early help is very much embedded throughout the improvement plan, rather than being discrete activity, but focused on development of the Children and Young People's Partnership and the early help strategy. And the Children and Young People's Partnership will be the group that drives that piece of work forward.
Thank you. It's just important to make sure we understood that, and we will be looking, assuming members will be sending in the next meeting. Right, let's summarise the conclusions we've got, James. I wrote down, I've got 5, I think, that we agreed. The one was that we note that we expect to get version 2 updated with the measures that matter of the improvement plan by the end of next week. Second, that the new format on looked after children that will bring the community arranged to scrutiny. That was something we wanted to do, Carol. Do we have a timescale for that? Could you give us a timescale for when we could expect to see details of those?
Of which bit, sorry,
The new format on looked after children.
For the corporate parenting board,
yes.
Again, if we can circulate that as a briefing within the next couple of weeks, it's quite easy.
Yeah. So we can expect to see that within 2 weeks. Thirdly, I have that you're also going to update members regularly and scrutiny on the corporate parenting progress. Again, when will the first one feedback from that be?
So the corporate parenting board meets tomorrow, but it's more of a training event with senior officers and members and the LGA. And then it falls into a pattern of recording. So it's required to report annually on the work that it's undertaken and the impact that it's had as part of its terms of reference.
How often will we scrutiny see that?
Well, as often as you ask, really. Right. But again, you've got to think about that in terms of your work plan. So I would certainly expect you to receive the annual reports of the corporate parenting board. Whether you effectively, the 5 political groups have nominated a member to be part of the corporate parenting board. So there's various feedback loops there. Whether you want to see it more often or not is another.
Yes, thank you. I'm taking on board Michael's comments to us to say that we should be ensuring that we're not just asking officers, but we're holding the executive to account. So it's the executive actually should be ensuring we're getting the members update. So we need to make sure they know as well that they're responsible for making sure you get an update. So I think that should be captured. And then I also had that we, yes, I think taking Councillor Andrew's point about we will get monthly updates to scrutiny on progress starting end of May.
Yes,
that was you got that,
and we'll do that as Councillor Andrew suggested as a briefing note, rather than as a formal agenda item potentially.
Each monthly, beginning end of May, 2 members are not necessarily coming to a scrutiny meeting. And the 5th one was taking Councillor Fagan's point. We need to make sure that we understand what reflection that there is in the feedback we get on how the voice of the child is being incorporated into performance measures, and I presume that will be in the first report being collected by the end of July, the first quarter report. That makes sense?
Yes, some of that depends on which measures and matters that we land on.
Yes,
but certainly we will be keen to demonstrate that the voice of the child in any case is evident in the work that we do, because that's absolutely
and it should be mentioned in the report at least how it's been considered.
Yes.
So we know at least you thought about it.
Yeah, and we'd expect to see that in audit reports as well.
That meet your requirement, Councillor Fagan? Great, thank you. Do members agree that captures what we've agreed as our conclusions that we'd like to propose for this session of the meeting? Who will propose that then? Councillor Jones, thank you. A second, Councillor Summers. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Well, we can now move on to item 10 on the agenda, which is the work programme review. I'll make a few notes about that. You hopefully will have seen in the pack, and the officer done a really good report on all the meetings that we're proposing to hold on our work plan looking forward for the next month. And we've actually been having quite a significant review of that. We have a regular meeting team of myself, Jenny as vice chair, Michael now, Darryl, Matthew and James on our work programme and just improving how we do things as well, not just the work programme, but how we improve how we actually work more effectively. And we've got several proposals. One is that after the May meeting, we revert to bi-monthly after May. At the moment, we've got monthly meetings scheduled for next year, but we're suggesting that, I think we've discussed it quite a lot today, to give better preparation time for members, because a month comes up so quickly that to actually read all the material and do it justice is actually quite difficult. More particularly, it also gives time for officers to develop more specific workshop material and meeting reports that are different and not, as Darryl said, not the same one. So the workshop should be a different purpose than actual scrutiny meeting. So we give officers time to do more in-depth reports, which then we could scrutinise potentially more effectively. And it would mean we could have more detail in the workshops, preparation in advance of what we expect, and what we want from meetings in terms of the improvement outcomes, and to hold those workshops earlier, so we as members can think about what we can improve in the workshops, so then we can scrutinise in more depth. So that's the first proposal, that we revert back to bi-monthly, but also be smarter in the other things that we do, such as what we just talked about, by having monthly reports just sent to committee members that don't come to the scrutiny meeting, but they come to us, task and finish groups, individual members on perhaps representing partners and like the corporate parenting board. So we suggest that the June 21st meeting is not held, but what we do instead is have a committee meeting to look through the work programme for the next year in more detail. So we look at the things we actually want to cover and the things that we don't do through scrutiny, but we get in smarter ways. So hopefully it's penciled in the diary that date of the 21st, and we have a committee meeting with officers present to work through the work programme together. On the 17th of May, what we're proposing, we had a meeting on this on Friday and yesterday, that it should cover SEN and corporate parenting. And we have a workshop. We've got some suggested dates that will come to you on either the 11th of May or the 13th of May on where we are at the moment with the current situation with SEN, so that you're briefed ready for the work, the next meeting on the 17th of May. And you'll notice that in the work plan, I've already printed out the page for the 17th of May, at the bottom, we've actually added a note to say what the proposed workshop content would be. And it's actually been already dated the meeting we had yesterday, what the topics of the workshop might be and when it can potentially be held. So those are the thoughts on work programme. I'm open up to members to comment, but we put a lot of thought in as a team, so without your feedback, please, Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. The workshop for the 17th of May, it's so much more helpful having the workshop not just before the meeting.
Yeah.
But this says it's just before the meeting.
Well, yes, that's only because we're already pretty close to it, because it's a month, so it's only 3 weeks away. So we have to give time for officers to prepare. But the point is, by now moving to bi-monthly, we can agree what we want after the scrutiny, which then gives 2 months to prepare. And it means instead of just 2 days before, we could have the workshop at least a week before. And that's part of the plan to do that. So at the moment, it's really difficult to find the time to get a workshop prepared in time to have it earlier, which is one of the reasons to go bi-monthly. Totally agree.
Yeah.
So we would expect in future that the workshop would be at least a week before the actual meeting. Does that answer your question okay?
Yeah, yes, thank you, because
okay.
really it's too much brain.
This probably isn't good, but possible, but a lot of these workshops, we're here to scrutinise, not if you don't know how to scrutinise, don't be sat in this committee room. And it just seems to be you're creating meeting after meeting. If you find that councillors perhaps don't say it in the meetings, but feel it or say it outside, what was the point of that? What we need to be is effective. We don't need to be sat in meetings for the sake of meetings. So we need to cut a lot of this out and concentrate on the things that are important. Workshops, personally, I don't propose to know everything about anything really, but if they just send the slides out, that's as good as sitting in a workshop, because most of the time she's babbling on about something or other, and you can get more from the slides. So that's my feeling on it. Is perhaps less workshops. There's 12 months to go before new lot come in. You should have done this 3 years ago, not now with what's the point of training councillors that ain't going to be here next year?
I think we're about to fundamentally disagree on that, because we identified at the beginning of this year that one of the great failings was that members were not.
Well, I feel I am qualified to scrutinise, and I do every time I'm here. Perhaps other councillors should get up to the same standard then.
I know you think that, but obviously I've been on scrutiny for 3 years, and I know I was never up to speed in what background was to the issues that we were scrutinising. And Councillor Newton and I, as part of the LGA support they've given us, we produced an assessment of the pros and cons of how effective we were in scrutiny. We identified very clearly that a key problem that members come into scrutiny and we're not educated or trained in not only scrutiny, but the issues that we are actually scrutinising, and that there was a real need for greater in-depth knowledge of the subject before we went to scrutiny.
Absolutely. So perhaps you should get rid of proportionality altogether and get people that actually want to scrutinise on a scrutiny committee and not just be shoved in there by their political
You
parties.
can't do that. Councillors are entitled to do whatever committees they have to go on. And that's quite right and proper and from different groups. I think that's an impossibility. Worse, you might want that. That would preclude most members of being the scrutiny, which I don't believe would be acceptable either in the terms of being a councillor or to the council, frankly. And we could put it up, but I don't think that would be acceptable. I think most of the members have said that the workshops are extremely valuable in understanding the topic in order to be able to scrutinise effectively. Anybody else want to give some feedback on that?
Can I just say they're not just training?
No.
They're giving an overall picture, so then you can home in and scrutinise once you've got all the facts.
So you found it valuable?
Yeah.
Councillor Jones, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I agree, although I missed the workshop the other day. But the others that I've attended have been fantastic and yeah, very good. My only concern is reducing the number of meetings, is that they go back to some of the meetings we had before you, Chair. We were going on for quite a substantial amount of time, and you were losing actual focus because they were going on for like 4 or 5 hours. And
yes,
so we've managed to keep them to about 2.5 to 3 hours, which I would support to keep doing.
That's a really important point. That's what we're proposing on the June meeting. We have a meeting between us of making sure that we have, if we have these bi-monthly meetings, that we still make sure we do all the work we need to do in other smarter ways, such as having reports and sent directly to us, members allocated to certain groups of committees of feedback, that we don't actually review some of the reports in scrutiny, but that they're sent to us in order for us to comment on if we wish to. But there are smarter ways in which it's not worked out. And having talked to officers and other members, I think there are more benefits in having bi-monthly than there are monthly. But you're right, then we have to address those questions. And if we get together to discuss that, hopefully we can find a way through to make sure we do work smarter, but we don't miss out on making sure we do all the things we need to do with our own meetings. I'll come back to you. But Mr. Darren, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I take the points that have been made by everybody really, but I think in terms of commitment, if we have set dates, set times for meetings that we actually stick to, so it's not rude to walk out at the end. If it goes past a certain time, it's the thing to do. It tends to speed the chair up. Having been a chair on many occasions myself, you tend to get through it. And also in terms of information, one of the real problems that we've got is the fact that, obviously I'm new to this, but just the amount of information that comes and is added on defeats the purpose of communication. And I think if we are going to have, a pre-meeting, a workshop, which is of limited time, and I think we're talking an hour and a half maximum for me, or an hour. It's not an age thing. I've always been like that. But basically, and then be very selective, because there's so much pressure on people to put out too many reports to say that they've actually put them out. So if we are going to look at SEND, and there is information, summaries are excellent, and additional information, if you need it, is even better. And then we can ask or keep quiet. We know about it, or we keep quiet, in my view. And I think the interesting thing about that would be, I would like to know the dates going for a full year and the times. And I think that's just standard practice. And even, I've got going further than a year is not necessarily important, but 18 months is often the case. And that's that cycle. Otherwise, you can't get the continuity of always being in the right place at the right time. And I think that is, the myth that because you've actually emailed someone, you communicated with them, is one of the truisms of 2022. And I think it's very important that we are very clinical about the way we communicate if we want to do, as Councillor Kenyon said, is scrutinise properly. I think there are made some good points to be made.
Nobody would argue with that at all, quite right. And purpose of meetings we're having is to make sure, as you say, we have a year ahead for scrutiny. We know what meetings are being held, when the workshops are, they should add value. I mean, totally agree with Councillor Kenyon, if they're not adding value, we shouldn't do them. But so far, members have indicated that they have value for them. and particularly people come new onto committees, they do a great way of making them feel you know what's going on. Because the impression's often been like, first people come on for a year, they're like, that has actually no idea, because it's such a complicated subject. So the idea was to upgrade people's knowledge and skills as soon as we possibly could, so people did feel confident about scrutinising. And in terms of meetings, I think we're running over a while, I'm continuing checking the time to make sure that we do finish at the 5:30, so I think we're going to make that. But it's occasionally go over, but we shouldn't go over. I agree, that's absolutely the aim that we should have. Right, Councillor Summers, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm okay with pre-meetings. What I have trouble with is what Darrell had to go through. He did this the other night also, and that's just a waste of my time and his time. I can understand committees getting together to talk about it themselves and see what questions they might ask officers, but to have officers go through the whole procedure beforehand is a bit ridiculous. Anyway, that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. You had your hand up there. Did you want to make a comment?
It was a comment only on the content of the forward work plan. So once you've finished this particular discussion, there's a point about that workshop being made. So that's clarified.
Okay. Right, I'd just like to ask you, members of you, so I propose that we agree that our work programme after May should be bi-monthly along the lines that we're talking about. You propose that, Councillor? Seconder? I'll second it. And it's up to us four to vote. Do we agree? I'm in favour of that. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll work as a team we talked about to put a work programme together and put a year's programme together, including proposed dates for workshops as well.
Can we make that flexible? If it doesn't work, we can cancel in mid.
If we need
mid-term.
to, it's good to have that. Yeah, that
We need
contingency
that
if we need to.
because if it's too much for officers, then we need to back off a little bit because they're going to be very busy in the next one.
And indeed, if you have to need something in emergency, there's no reason why we should come back and say what date would fit. That's always something we should bear in mind. Right, Darrell, I think it's a good point for you to comment.
Thank you. So in your pack, it's the workshop items for May the 17th. So corporate parenting, that's fine. That's very consistent with the conversation we had a little while ago, updating on the arrangements for corporate parenting. You've got developing a trauma-informed practice or service, which we're not. So
no, that's changed now.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's only changed yesterday in a meeting.
Okay.
It's been updated.
So yes, it'd be useful to know what that's changed to. So
yeah, we'll get that to you, but it's going to be on SEND and where we are with current SEND practices within the authority.
Okay.
So we know the situation is SEND.
Are we being sent that information? Are we being sent that information?
Yeah, it was only changed yesterday afternoon, so you haven't had a chance to update everybody yet, but you will be sent the updated version. And we'll now work out a programme of events and set the proposed work programme with that content.
I would just like to bring up though, this is an event, by the way. You and Vice Chair are working a lot with officers, and we're getting a lot of stuff very late, quite frankly. I think there needs to be more communication with committee members. We shouldn't. I feel left out in the dark quite often. But I don't think I need to be left out in the dark. If you need to find someone else to take my place, I have no problem. But I want to be kept involved with what's going on, not just before a meeting or during a meeting. I want it beforehand, please, because this is ridiculous right now.
I agree.
Okay? Thank you.
Yes, we did agree we needed monthly meetings, and they proved really, really challenging to do because no doubt, as soon as we finish one, it's starting another. And part of the reason we want to change is precisely because it is very difficult for everybody to keep up to date and do things in a timely manner. And it's been necessary because we had the improvement plan, we had a lot of work to do, we agreed we'd meet monthly because there's a lot of change going on and we've managed that really well between us.
But can we have that discussed before with us rather than you go ahead and make these discussions without us being involved? You know, come bring it before the committee, say this is the idea we want to have, and we go to officers and discuss it with them, not go to officers and then come back to us and tell us what's going to happen.
We did do that, and we agreed that's what we do. So we did it. So we did actually do it. You were asked, and we agreed. So I think you must have missed it, but we didn't do anything that we hadn't agreed with. We didn't help us to do. But you pointed out it is absolutely right that we do that. Councillor Tommy, did you want to add anything on our work programme before we close the meeting?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Constructive meeting. We finished on time. Before we actually finish, I would like to say I understand that Matthew Sampson, it's your last meeting with us today, I gather, and that you'll moving on, and we just want to wish you well and thank you very much for the support you've given us in enhancing and improving the way we're working as a scrutiny committee. So thanks for your help and support over the last year. Wish you well. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed for being here today. Can I confirm the live recording has been turned off, please?